Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's good to see all of you. I'm over here at the last minute making some changes real quick, but welcome to the UFO Audit virtual mini conference. I hope everybody out there can hear me okay. We are live, we are streaming, we are gathering comments. Everything looks good. So want to just say I am Ray Hobbs. I'm the program director here at the Unexplained Network, and our fearless leader, president of the company, Margie K, is just a little bit under the weather, and she wanted to be here to do just a quick introduction for all of you. She's just a little bit under the weather, but we want to send our best vibes, our best thoughts, and everything to Margie. We love you, sweetheart. We couldn't do this without you. This is all because of you. And so I want to thank Margie on behalf of Skywatcher, our New York executive producer, and then myself here and the rest of the staff. Also got another announcement to make. Unfortunately, and this is how things can happen, Thiago Tichetti is not going to be able to make it today from Brazil. There was I got a last minute correspondence from him just a little while ago, and he had, let's just say, a family health issue. Someone very close to him is down. So we also want to then send Thiago all of our best and thoughts and prayers and vibes. We're off to a great start, aren't we, everybody? I guess I just want to say, that things happen, and Margie would have prepared a last minute speaker just in case something like this happened, because she's the professional at this. She does this stuff all the time. This is my very first little webinar mini conference kind of thing, and so there's going to be a few hiccups, folks, and I apologize, but it is free, you know what I mean? So we just want to do this for you. This is the first of a quarterly mini con that we're going to do for this year, and they all have different themes. They'll be cryptid and other, but I'm leading the series off with this UFO audit, and I want everyone to know where many of us have come from in our interest in UFOs, and man, there's a lot. The landscape is certainly a fantastically different sight than we saw 15 years ago, let alone 30 years ago, 40, 50 years ago. But with that said, I think it's very important for the view of some of my friends that I feel are among the top and most well-respected and most credible personalities that are out in the open in all of this, that I could bring to talk to you today. Everyone is going to voice their opinion about cases and about how to reach conclusions and investigations and research and just really engaging the critical thinker, those that we have left. Right? So I just thought UFO audit, I'll go ahead and bring it back, and then we're going to build on it in the future. I'm sure there's going to be a UFO audit 2 and maybe a 3 or more, but certainly I will finish that book. I can promise you that. Lord willing, I will finish that book. So today we're going to talk about the current state of the UFO movement as it is, a little bit about, some are going to talk a little bit about it, where it's been, where it is now, where it needs to go. But certainly Micah Hanks was leading us off. Thiago was due to go up second, so we'll bump John Burrough up into his slot, and then we'll bump David Marler, the headliner, into John's spot. I want to thank all of you, first of all. So many of you have taken the time to listen to our station and the product that we put out. We work hard to bring to you, and we appreciate all of you that stay with us, listen to us on the radio side every day at work and at home and in the driving across the United States in your tractor trailers, and always know that You listen to us and we listen to you, and we want you to contact us, and there'll be information along the way that tells you to reach out to us on the contact page on the main website and at unxnetwork.com, or, you can email me personally at racehobbs@unxnetwork.com. But we want to know your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions, what we can do better, what you like about what you find here. Certainly for us to improve our product for you, we need that feedback. Also, right before we get to, because Micah just signaled he's ready. Also, before this gets away from me, all of you registered and became members that are watching, today, and then those of you that'll be watching on demand later, this is for you as well. Those memberships help drive what we do. There's one for every, there's different price ranges for you, and there's one that fits every budget, really. But whatever you can do, if you can do it, because we know for most times are really tough, but we could use the support. Those memberships really help, and you get so much out of it. You get copies of the magazine, and which, look at this, I was looking at one this morning. This right here, Unex magazine, it's just loaded with articles, and Margie K has been doing this since I've known her. And there's been magazines that have come and gone, Open Minds, Intrepid magazine. These are great magazines, beautifully done, well written, and they've come and gone. Margie is still going, and I'm super proud of her. I mean, I can't tell you just how hard she works. And she was so excited, got up this morning, was ready to come introduce me and talk to all of you real quick and say some stuff. I just feel bad for her. So Margie, you hang in there. I know you're in the back in your green room. Hang in there, sweetheart. We love you. Up next, we are going to lead off with our good friend Micah Hanks. I'm getting the signal that he's there. He's all set. He's ready to go. So let's get to it. Micah Hanks is a writer, a researcher. He's a podcaster and longtime advocate for scientific research into unidentified aerial phenomena. He is the editor and co-founder of the Debrief, a science, technology, and defense news site, and the host of the Micah Hanks program, a weekly podcast that covers scientific mysteries. Since 2024, Micah has also worked as director of the UAP Sightings Reporting System, growing database of UAP sightings collected from civilians and military people, law enforcement folks around the world. The title of Micah's talk today is Aerial Phenomena Evaluating the Enigma. Micah, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Race, and welcome, everybody. This is a real extraordinary opportunity, I think, for so many people to come together and share some insights at an event like the UFO Audit that we are participating in today. And so, again, it was very important to me to be able to be here. I want to thank Race for having me and having me actually lead off this session today, because we have a lot to talk about. And again, some of the stated objectives of this event, the UFO Audit, are looking at, developments that are happening right now within the UFO movement. And on that point, I really couldn't imagine there being better people to comment on this than those here present. Again, obviously, John Burrough, someone who I've met and who I respect tremendously, and I know that Race does also. And then, of course, historian David Marler, one of my dearest friends in the entire field. We have a great group of people here present today and who are offering unique and very important perspectives on the phenomenon. And so with that in mind, we'll dive right in, because my talk today involves what I have come to call the shadows of the U.S. legacy program. My name's Micah Hanks, of course. I'm a co-founder of the Debrief.org. I've been doing podcasts on this network and, of course, with Race and others for many years. And I also launched an endeavor called the UAP Sightings Reporting System, available at uapsightings.org a couple of years ago. It's a database involving UAP reports. But primarily what I want to try and talk about today are the idea of U.S. black budget programs, and also fundamentally what we can learn from a review of historical UAP cases and what that might tell us about what the nature of some of these special programs, or actually special access programs in the deep black budget world of the U.S. defense establishment, what this might all mean. So diving right into this. So to begin this conversation, really, I want to start by looking at the idea of official secrets, and more specifically, the idea of special access programs within the United States defense establishment. And I can't think of a better place, really, or a reference that we might use for this portion of the conversation than an article that was published back in January 2000 titled, "In Search of the Pentagon's Billion-Dollar Hidden Budgets, How the U.S. Keeps Its Research and Development Spending Under Wraps." That title really kind of says it all, but I always found it intriguing that this article was published in the British publication Jane's International Defense Review, and on the morning of January 5th, 2000. And people who follow UFO history, I know David Marler certainly will recognize that date, because that happened to have been the date of the famous St. Clair County Triangle UFO incident. And of course, I'm not saying there's some sort of a connection there, but again, that date is significant to people who follow the history of this subject. But the article by Bill Sweetman, who of course is a former editor of Jane's Defense and a longtime aviation reporter, and someone who's probably best known for his work trying to get to the bottom of claims involving what was known as Project Aurora, an alleged super-secret American spy plane that back in the 1990s was believed to have existed by Sweetman and others. In fact, many people today still believe that Project Aurora, or something like it, some sort of a secret U.S. spy plane, might have existed and might still be in existence and was kept off the books for various reasons. And one line of evidence, you might say, for the existence of a secretive hypersonic aircraft involved reports of mystery booms. And I've logged those mystery boom reports. In fact, I've got a website called mysterybooms.com, where for a time I was keeping information up to date on that website about these reports. There are a lot of different things that can cause so-called mystery booms. One of them, of course, is the sonic booms produced by aircraft. And as he noted in his article, back in 2000, Sweetman wrote, "The phantom boomers appear to avoid densely populated areas, and the stories usually go no further than the local paper. At least that's how it was back in the 1990s and the early 2000s. These days, with this crazy media cycle, it's a lot different." But as Sweetman went on to say, the first conclusion from this data is that supersonic aircraft are operating over the U.S., and secondly, we may conclude that the U.S. Air Force and other services either cannot identify them, or that they are misleading the public because the operations are secret. Now, these are two fundamentally important concepts here. The idea that there could be unacknowledged aircraft that our government knows about, and that they might engage in intentional misdirection, or something we might actually call disinformation, to cover up their existence, or that there are objects that could cause sonic booms, whether they are human-built or maybe something else, and the Air Force at the time didn't know what these things were. Those are the two ideas he puts on the table, and ideas we're going to revisit again here shortly. But of these possibilities, Sweetman really strikes home in terms of the argument we're going to be outlining here, where he writes, quote, "The latter case is supported by the existence of a massive secret structure which can truly be described as a shadow military, and which exists in parallel with the programs that the Department of Defense discloses in public. It is protected by a security system of great complexity. Since 1995, 2 high-level commissions have reported on this system and have concluded that it is too complex, that it is immensely expensive, although its exact costs defy measurement, that it includes systematic efforts to confuse and disinform the public, and that in some cases it favors security over military utility. The Defense Department, however, firmly resists any attempt to reform this system." Well, the rest of Sweetman's article from January 2000 actually reads almost like a glossary of American secrecy and black budget programs. He goes on to talk about a report by a Senate commission that found that there were 150 DoD-approved special access programs, or SAPs, and that there were different kinds, of course, of SAPs that exist in the United States defense establishment. He noted some of the acknowledged SAPs, most of them, in fact, started as unacknowledged programs. That was the case with the F-117 and the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. And he goes on to note, an unacknowledged SAP, a black program, is a program which is considered so sensitive that the fact of its existence is what the U.S. calls a core secret, defined specifically in the U.S. Air Force regulations as, quote, any item, progress, strategy, or element of information, the compromise of which would result in unrecoverable failure. In other words, revealing the existence of a black program, Sweetman says, would undermine its military value. Now, since Sweetman was talking about the Air Force specifically there in that last quote, I'll skip ahead a bit where he goes on to write that, quote, within the U.S. Air Force there are signs that special access programs form a shadow department alongside the white world programs. Then he gives us some examples of what are known as parallel organizations and covers used by the U.S. government. A great example he gives us is also a famous one that many out there will know, as he gives us the following example of a parallel organization which relates to the U.S. Air Force's flight test activities. As he notes, quote, the U.S. Air Force Flight Test Center has a main location at Edwards Air Force Base, which supports most U.S. Air Force flight test programs. Some classified programs are carried out at Edwards North Base, but he says the most secure and sensitive programs are the responsibility of an Air Force Flight Test Center detachment based at the secret flight test base on the edge of the dry Groom Lake in Nevada and known as Area 51. The U.S. Air Force still refuses to identify the Area 51 base, or at least they did back in 2000 when he wrote this article. I believe that the first official acknowledgement of Area 51 in a government document came around 11 years later, and that in relation to CIA documents that were declassified that year. But as Sweetman noted, the Air Force at the time refused to identify Area 51 and referred to it only as a, quote, operating location near Groom Lake, and which, he also notes, was protected from any further disclosure by an annually renewed presidential order. Now, this is significant because, as he notes, Area 51's linkage to Edwards is a form of cover. Actions and statements which are intended to conceal the existence of a black program by creating a false impression in the public. Examples of cover mechanisms that he gives us in the article include, for instance, the U-2 spy plane, which was famously billed as having been a weather research aircraft. He also notes the concealment of the CIA's Lockheed A-12 spy plane, which was hidden behind acknowledged cousins which very closely resembled it, like the YF-12 and the SR-71. Longtime followers of Area 51 lore like myself will also appreciate this quote. He notes another example of a cover is the way in which people who work at Area 51 are nominally assigned to government or contractor organizations in the Las Vegas area and commute to the base in unmarked aircraft. Well, up to this point, we've covered black programs, cover stories, we've touched on Area 51, we've talked about special access programs. I have one final quote I want to share from Sweetman's article before we move on here, and this involves a concept that some in the United States government refer to as pearls too precious to wear. What exactly does that describe? Well, as he notes, some have pointed out that the military utility of a breakthrough technology is limited if commanders do not know how to use it. A senior officer on the Joint Staff remarked that, quote, we still treat certain capabilities as pearls too precious to wear. We acknowledge their value, but because of their value, we lock them up and we don't use them for fear of losing them, unquote. As Sweetman goes on to explain, the report implied that the Special Access Program world keeps field commanders in the dark until the systems are ready for use, and even then, quote, they are put under such tight constraints that they are unable to use Special Access Program products in any practical way, unquote. So in essence, that final quote there from Sweetman's article is really describing technologies the United States government possesses and which it keeps hidden away in the black world. And I might add also that we might speculate about the origins of these technologies. It might be something that was developed independently within the United States. This could also be the outgrowth of black programs that are highly compartmentalized, and so that people who were working on one part of the program didn't know about other parts and things that other contractors were working on. And so in sum total, components for a larger project even could have been assembled unbeknownst to those, at least most of those, who were involved in assembling it. A few people, a small number, will actually know about the completed project, what it does, what it can do. But if it cannot be deployed on the battlefield, and it doesn't have an immediate use or commanders aren't able to control it, then the government doesn't even tell our commanders about its existence. We might also, of course, speculate that there are other means of acquiring said technologies. A breakthrough technology might not just be something we develop ourselves or with the help of contractors in a black program. It could also be something that is acquired, right? We might acquire a technology from a foreign adversary, or using our imaginations, you might even acquire something a little more exotic, right? And so when you hear these stories about alleged crash retrievals, I mean, those could come from a range of different sources, but the U.S., in any case, could also acquire a capability, and there may be limitations in terms of its efficacy and how we can use it. And so once it is in our possession, either through creation or acquisition, whatever it is, we don't deploy it. Military commanders don't even know about it. It's one of those pearls too precious to wear. And so that discussion right there really makes a good segue out of the last portion of the discussion into where I want to head right now, and that involves certain possibilities. To be more specific, a series of possible scenarios that I've developed involving the relationship between U.S. black programs and the UAP issue. And I'm not the first person to have done this. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. There are ideas that I will have left out, and you may think of others. There may be some things I'll present here that people haven't thought about. In likelihood, most of these ideas have been addressed elsewhere, and many of the points I'm going to make are not mutually exclusive. Some of these things could actually complement one another, and we'll get into that. But here are a few possible considerations when it comes to the relationship between U.S. black programs and the UAP issue. One, historical information, I would contend, appears to support the existence of various kinds of unidentified phenomena, some of which appear to represent technologies of unknown origin. In other words, what we might call real UAP or real UFOs, the ones that traditional UFO researchers are most interested in. And I actually believe, based on a review of historical information, that there are genuine anomalies, and some of these things do appear to represent technologies of unknown origin. I think that's true regardless of what we say those technologies are or where they come from. So the second possibility, the U.S. government may have deployed some highly advanced breakthrough technologies over the decades which have remained unacknowledged to the public. I think that's also probably very likely to be true. In fact, I think that we have good evidence for it, and Sweetman talked about it in his article there that we were quoting from. Possibility 3. Some of these technological advancements that the U.S. is engaged in may have been inspired by descriptions of unidentified phenomena, or even derived from acquisitions directly associated with the phenomena in question. In other words, alleged recoveries of exotic vehicles, like we were talking about. So I would say that, again, whether we acquired these pearls too precious to wear, or if UFO reports caused military commanders to go, what are these things? And can we get our hands on one? And even if we can't, I mean, can we talk about how these things might operate? And based on what people say they see them doing, can we try to build something that does that? I would argue that a good example of that kind of a development is the famous joint U.S. and Canadian program known as the Avro car. And I got to see one of those recently while visiting the National Museum there near Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. But when you're looking at the Avro car, I mean, in my opinion, there is no denying the fact that this was an attempt to build a flying saucer. And the question, of course, that comes to mind is, well, if we tried to build a flying saucer, presuming we didn't already have them, that we didn't have some sort of a technology that was acquired at the end of the Second World War from the Nazis or something like that. And again, that's a reference to the famous Nazi UFO conspiracy theories. But my point is, if we didn't build the flying saucers that began to be widely reported after the summer of 1947, with sightings like those made by Kenneth Arnold and many others, if those weren't ours and we didn't already have something, and therefore the Avro car wasn't a cover for that kind of technology that we were trying to keep under wraps, then it seems very likely that the descriptions of flying saucers being made by people at that time inspired an actual attempt, jointly by the Canadian government and the United States, to build a flying saucer. We wanted to see if we could build something that matched the performance capabilities of what people said they were seeing in the skies at that time. And so I think that's a good example of what I'm talking about when I say that descriptions of unidentified phenomena alone could in fact, and I actually think they have, inspired some novel aircraft designs. Now, the Avro car, sadly, could barely get off the ground. It was essentially little more than a hovercraft, and it could get off the ground and fly around, but again, it certainly didn't match the capabilities of flying saucer reports of that time. I just suspect, though, that those reports probably influenced the nice try attempt at building a flying saucer that became the Avro car. But the other component of point number 3 here before we move on is we might also have derived some capabilities from actual acquisitions of foreign aircraft, whether they are foreign from another nation like China or Russia, or even if they had come from off-planet. Again, that is a possibility we'll leave on the table. And that brings us to possibility number 4. Disinformation has been employed as a means of protecting the reality of the second scenario, U.S. government developments of highly advanced breakthrough technologies. And that appears to have incorporated counterintelligence operations that involve information allegedly related to scenario number 3. In other words, and in short, I think there's a good possibility we have made some exotic-looking stuff, and we have tried to make people think that those things are alien spacecraft. We have encouraged that belief as a cover for some of our own advanced developments, and that involved disinformation. Now, possibility number 5, it's also feasible that that might work in reverse, that there were counterintelligence efforts, again, if we presume that there may have been some acquired craft from very exotic locales, i.e. extraterrestrial craft or something like that. If we didn't want people to know we had that and that we'd acquired it, one way we could potentially try to hide that information is by misleading the public into thinking that we are developing secretive programs and that weird stuff that are seen in the skies actually belong to us. So that possibility also involves disinformation, but in reverse from what we heard in point number 4. And it really just illustrates how it could go both ways. We could use deception to cover up anything from extraterrestrial technology to stuff that we have built by misleading people into thinking it's aliens. Point number 6, this possibility is intriguing because it starts to combine some of these. I would argue that if possibilities 3 and 5 are correct, in other words, that some descriptions of UAP or even acquired technologies account for some of the stuff that we have, and that we've used disinformation to cover that up, then it also seems likely that the United States or other nations possess a deeper knowledge of unidentified anomalous phenomena than is publicly known. In fact, this would have to be the case, if points 3 and 5 are correct. And that, of course, conforms to the widely held views, which really even to this day predominate the whole UFO disclosure concept, and the ongoing effort to try and disclose UFO information. We even have a group of congressional members, the Task Force on Declassification of Federal Secrets, whose sole focus is to try and work on getting information like this out there into the public. So again, if points 3 and 5 are accurate, the government knows more than it lets on, and right now this essentially conforms to the UFO disclosure concept, which we hear about all the time these days, but really has been a lasting feature of the broader UFO debate for decades already. Finally, point number 7, taking a slightly more skeptical position here for a moment so as to cover all the bases. If points 3 and 5 are not true and accurate, and therefore possibilities 2 and 4 may offer better explanations. In other words, we built these things ourselves, and the government has used disinformation to help control the narrative and lead people or mislead people into thinking that these are more exotic technologies, maybe even from off-planet. But I will note, of course, that this also does not preclude the existence of genuine, unidentified phenomena. And further, as we outlined in point 3, but it would still apply, I think, to point number 2 there, we may actually have some breakthrough technologies that are completely made here on Earth that the United States government designed and built itself, but they still could have been inspired by UAP reports, right? And they may have been a better iteration of that than the Avro car ended up being. So that's at least possible, and as you can see, there are combinations of things that work here. But for general purposes, these 7 possibilities offer us a kind of framework in terms of how we can think about the relationship between the black budget world and the UAP issue. And so now that we have established sort of a background on the terminology, thanks to Bill Sweetman, and then these possibilities in terms of what the relationship between the black budget world and UAP might be, now I want to try and go looking for possible signs, fingerprints, if you will, or shadows of the so-called legacy program. Because although we don't have the actual program right in front of us, we don't have documents describing what it is, when it was designed, what we have, what we made, what we may have acquired. We don't have all that information. But there are some very intriguing UAP reports from throughout history that might offer us some perspectives. Two things I want to point out. I'm not offering these case examples that we're going to look at. There are 5 cases I want to focus on. I don't offer all of these as being one single focused perspective on what might be happening. In other words, I'm not trying to say all of these are alien spacecraft and here's the reason why, or that all of these are secretly disinformation or something like that. The cases I've selected here are cases that to me warrant deeper thinking, possible reinterpretation, and reinvestigation, because some of the components in these cases could potentially point to any range or certain combinations of those factors we outlined earlier. And so as a good starting place, really what better place to start in a conversation about alleged crash retrievals and things like this than the landmark case of Roswell from 1947. Most of us, of course, know the specifics of the Roswell case. In June of 1947, a rancher named Mac Brazel found a bunch of very unusual wreckage on his ranch outside of Roswell, New Mexico. So he contacts Roswell Army Airfield, and they send out Major Jesse Marcel, who comes out, looks at the property. He sees all this wreckage. He's not really sure what it is. So there is a retrieval operation. Some of this wreckage is brought back. But then Jesse Marcel, whose job is to know what all the aircraft are in the U.S. inventory at that time, and also known aircraft from foreign nations, even though he didn't know what this was, Marcel is suddenly told, we now think this was a weather balloon, and he is made to do a photo op where he poses with some of this weather balloon wreckage, and this is what goes out to the media. And so at the time, following the initial buzz about the alleged capture of a flying disc on a ranch near Roswell, the media essentially drops the story and just says, oh, it was nothing but a balloon. Even most UFO advocates for many decades after that didn't pay attention to this case. And it wasn't until the 1970s when civilian researchers like Stanton Friedman and William Moore began reinvestigating the case. Moore and Charles Berlitz published the first book about this, the Roswell Incident, and suddenly this claim involving a crashed flying saucer in the southwestern desert is reignited. And for a time in the 80s and 90s, it was considered by many in the UFO community to be the smoking gun in terms of not only a UFO case, but one that implicates the United States government in a cover-up. And just to be clear, Roswell was a cover-up. That is absolutely true. There is no disputing that. The only thing that we can dispute is what exactly was being covered up. Because many decades later, the official Air Force story ended up being that, well, there was a high-altitude balloon project that we had at the time called Project Mogul, and the Air Force, in a couple of reports that they published in the 1990s, eventually said that they thought, their very best estimate at least, was that some kind of a balloon crashed out there near Roswell, and they thought it was probably one of the Mogul balloons. And this would have been the reason why the story suddenly changed from being a flying disc crash to a weather balloon. The United States military actually had been covering up a project that was a top-secret project we had at that time. Now, of course, some in the UFO community, and I can't really fault them for thinking this way, but I mean, they didn't buy the Mogul explanation, and their argument for that had been, well, if we know you guys covered this up in the past, and now you're admitting there was a cover-up, why are we to believe that the Mogul explanation isn't a cover-up? Now, in my personal opinion, I don't think that Roswell involved a weather balloon or Project Mogul. I also don't think that Roswell involved a flying saucer from outer space. But I do think that there was a cover-up, and in my personal opinion, I also think it most likely involved some U.S. secret technologies that were being tested at that time. And additionally, before I explain a little bit about what I think most likely happened at Roswell, I'll also add that, in my opinion, this very fact that the U.S. government had been covering up something of its own, not an alien technology that was acquired, that had probably been the reason for some suspected disinformation that began to emerge around that time and which, not surprisingly, seemed to be targeting William Moore and others who were directly involved in the Roswell investigations at that time. In other words, I don't think that the United States government, and more specifically, certain individuals involved with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, were necessarily concerned about the cosmic Watergate being opened wide and laid bare before the American public and the world for that matter. Again, I think that really what they were concerned about was that UFO researchers looking for evidence of a flying saucer from outer space might start talking to witnesses and they might start finding data that describes something else. And if the government didn't want that to get out at that time, disinformation would be a very useful tool in helping to cover up what actually happened and what the government did not want to come to light. So now on that point, what actually happened? Back in the 1990s, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of Roswell, there was a very intriguing article about this that appeared in Popular Mechanics, and that was by, I believe, Jim Willis at the time, but they spoke to some of the people who were on the ground and people with various theories, and they looked at the traditional narratives and really kind of offered a half-century retrospective on where we are now with Roswell. But the final few paragraphs of that article from the Popular Mechanics article were particularly intriguing to me because it described a so-called, quote, Japanese UFO. And what they describe is that it had come to the attention of editors at Popular Mechanics shortly prior to the publication of the article commemorating Roswell at 50, that there had been a program that had been testing a lifting body type aircraft and a Japanese Fugo-style balloon. Fugo balloons, by the way, were balloons that were designed to carry bombs across the Pacific Ocean, and using barometers and a series of mechanisms, when these balloons would make their way over the United States, they were essentially designed to drop these explosive devices, and then they were designed actually to set fire to forests and therefore impact our material resources during the war. But you can look up the FUGO or Fugo balloons online and read all about those. Well, Popular Mechanics said that a Fugo-style balloon and a special kind of an aircraft were being tested in 1947. There had been a crash. There had also been a cover-up, as one would expect. And this had been actually what happened at Roswell, and that Popular Mechanics had not only had some source that brought this story to their attention, but even rather cryptically referred to documents they believed that were forthcoming that would soon be released that would document all this, and that would reveal that this is actually what had happened at Roswell and was the basis of the crash retrieval story. Well, that's kind of where things stayed for a while, but then many years later, there was a book published by noted researcher Nick Redfern, and that book was titled Body Snatchers in the Desert. And not only did Nick acknowledge essentially the same story, but he had several whistleblowers whom he had spoken to who claimed to have had knowledge of various components of the secret program that was going on at that time. And again, no matter where you sit on Roswell or UFOs more broadly, I highly recommend people read Nick Redfern's book, Body Snatchers in the Desert, and indeed it does refer to certain documents that have been released over the years. As far as I know, the ones that Popular Mechanics have been referring to haven't been released, but there are some documents that have made their way to the public over the years that do describe not only tests involving experimental aircraft, but also crashes, and one specifically that occurred on July 4th, 1947, that seemed to be the real, in my opinion, smoking gun in terms of what happened at Roswell. So to summarize, before we look at some more cases, if Roswell actually was a U.S. experimental project, and the government tried to cover it up, and the reason for the cover-up was not to prevent the public from knowing about the UFO that we captured in 1947, but was in fact to cover up a highly controversial program involving experimental aircraft tests that we were doing, and also human test subjects. That's part of the real reason for the controversy. But if we didn't want that information to get out, naturally, the UFO researchers who were going out there trying to find witnesses and interview people about what happened at Roswell would be a logical target for disinformation. And in fact, that's exactly what ended up happening. We had the MJ-12 documents, which claim that Roswell was a real legitimate acquisition of a UFO that crashed in 1947. The MJ-12 documents were first leaked to filmmaker Jamie Shandera, but of course he was working with whom? Stanton Friedman, one of the most well-known UFO investigators, and of course one who was on the trail of data about the Roswell incident. Bill Moore, of course, who was famously co-opted and provided certain information, but on the basis that he would work as an informant for the government. He, of course, was approached by individuals including Special Agent Rick Doty, and Moore, of course, had been the co-author on the first book about what? You guessed it, the Roswell incident. So all that said, to me, this could very well be a good example of what Bill Sweetman was talking about, the use of disinformation to cover up actual U.S. programs. Again, if you follow that interpretation, but I do believe that there's some good data that supports that, and I recommend, again, Nick's book, Body Snatchers in the Desert. Case number 2 that we'll look at, the Socorro incident from 1964. And this is another case that's very near and dear to my heart because David Marler and I jumped in his Jeep a few years back, and we drove out there where the U.S. Air Force officers went out there shortly after police officer Lonnie Zamora said that he saw this egg-shaped craft out there in an arroyo. You can still see the little circles of stones that the Air Force officers put down on the ground surrounding the indentations where the presumed landing gear touched down. Again, a brief summary of this incident. Lonnie Zamora was a police officer who was on duty that afternoon in 1964 in Socorro, New Mexico. He had been chasing a black vehicle that was speeding, and suddenly he hears a loud roaring sound and he sees an object up in the sky. And so he's afraid that maybe a TNT shack up on the hill had exploded, and so he actually veers off the road and goes up a little gravel driveway, which I believe that David and I actually located while we were out there a couple of years ago. But Lonnie Zamora makes it up that driveway after a couple of attempts, and he's driving along the top of the arroyo, and down there in the valley, he can see in this little depression down there in the desert some sort of an object. And he initially thought it was an overturned vehicle. He wasn't really sure what he was looking at, but he thought that he could see two small people standing next to this object and that they seemed startled by his presence. So he starts driving toward them thinking maybe somebody is in danger or injured, and he drives over as close as he can get to the object. As he's pulling up in his police car and he stops, keep in mind his window's open, he hears a loud clapping noise like a loud metal door shutting. And then suddenly this tremendous rumbling roar is being produced by this object, and it begins to lift off. He's out of his car at this point. He said he was afraid that the thing was going to explode, and so he runs around behind his vehicle and jumps onto the ground, taking cover, assuming it's going to explode. And then suddenly the rumbling noise stops, and he turns back around and he looks, and now he's observing the object flying off away from him toward the mountains in the distance at a rather tremendous speed, but moving silently. So Zamora goes back to his police car at this point, grabs his radio, and he calls for backup. And he's still watching this object as it's taking off toward the mountains. And again, I'll never forget looking at those mountains myself with David Marler and thinking what it must have felt like for Lonnie Zamora standing there watching this egg-shaped object flying off. We were right there looking at those same mountains one afternoon ourselves. And so once backup arrives, they said Lonnie Zamora was looking white as a ghost. He was very concerned. They go down into the arroyo together. They find evidence of scorched plants and also these markings that seemingly were left by the landing gear on this vehicle. So we have, again, what J. Allen Hynek would have called a CE-3, a close encounter of the third kind. There's a landed craft, and Zamora also said that he saw the apparent occupants outside that craft for a moment. Was it some sort of an aircraft that was having trouble? Were they scouting? I mean, it's anybody's guess what might have been happening here. In any case, in my opinion, the Socorro incident is one of history's best UFO cases, period. It was never solved by Project Blue Book, and even the very skeptically leaning Hector Quintanilla, who led Project Blue Book at that time, looked at every possibility in terms of U.S. special aircraft and technologies that might have been in development at that time, a possible moon lander, all kinds of things, and he could never find any kind of link to a U.S. experimental technology being tested out there in the desert at that time. And so Quintanilla even had to concede that this case remained unresolved. We'll probably never know what that thing was. Whereas, on the other hand, J. Allen Hynek and some of his colleagues like Jacques Vallée, they've continued to look at that case, and they seem to actually suggest that based on the lack of alternative explanations, Socorro was very likely an anomalous case. This might have actually been a genuine UAP and its mysterious occupants. In truth, really, no matter what you might speculate the Socorro incident to have represented, it is just that. It is a genuine UAP, and occupants were observed. But now, as far as speculations about what it might have been, although I've always assigned, and I still do, a very high credibility score to the Socorro incident, in light of what we have heard about Roswell, again, the test of a balloon-like technology and something that was being tested in the southwestern desert, but which was not a U.S. Air Force aircraft test, this actually was a test involving something that at the time would have been operated out of the Atomic Energy Commission. And again, Nick Redfern gets into all of the reasons why this was operated out of that agency and what that meant and how that ended up not being something that was directly related to the Air Force, and hence why the Air Force didn't find any evidence of it when they reviewed the Roswell case. That's all covered in Nick's book, Body Snatchers in the Desert. But in light of that, we have to look at the Socorro case and also wonder, I mean, is it possible that an Atomic Energy Commission project might have been responsible for a test that the Air Force wouldn't have known about, and therefore Hector Quintanilla, when he made inquiries, wasn't able to find anything? I mean, it's not impossible. And again, among the researchers who have considered possibilities like that include no less than Jacques Vallée. We'll probably never really know what the object was that Lonnie Zamora saw. I will note that the general egg shape is very consistent with UFO reports from over the decades and even bears some similarity to the famous 2004 Nimitz incident. So I try to be agnostic about Socorro. I think it's a good UAP case, but in light of certain things that have come to light, and specifically about the Roswell incident, I can't help but look back at Socorro with a few additional questions as time goes on, again considering the geography, right? This is in the American Southwest. And right there, you might say, in the midst of the Southwestern Atomic Weapons Complex, which was a very sensitive location during the Cold War, and in fact, it still is today. And then finally, of course, thinking back to what Bill Sweetman said, and the questions about cover stories and disinformation and other things that are used to cover up U.S. technologies that have been tested and occasionally which end up being seen by civilians, or maybe even police officers. Looking at another case, this is another favorite of mine, the Laxton CE3, and from right around the same time period, roughly 2 years after the Socorro incident, and this occurred on March 23, 1966, in Oklahoma. I'll quote from a newspaper article that appeared in the Houston Post on Saturday, March 26, 1966, page 1, and continued on page 5. I found this on newspapers.com, but I'll quote, "The sighting of a strange fish-shaped craft and its pilot before its vertical takeoff from an Oklahoma highway was reported Friday at Wichita Falls. A separate sighting of a similarly described craft was reported by an Oklahoma truck driver. Eddie Laxton, 56, an electronics instructor at Shepherd Air Force Base near Wichita Falls, said he was en route to the air base from Temple, Oklahoma Wednesday morning when he had to stop his car on U.S. Highway 70 because a silver fish-shaped object was blocking the highway. He said a man dressed in what appeared to be military fatigues was standing by the craft. But when he got out of his car and walked toward the object, the man entered the craft and took off. Laxton said the takeoff was vertical and that the craft had no rotors, such as those of a helicopter. He said there were numbers beginning with T141 on the craft, but he did not make out the others in the early morning darkness. Now, those are the main specifics of the case, but just to stop right there and comment for a moment, how many flying saucers from outer space do you expect to have the numbers or letters like T141 appearing on the side, along with an apparent occupant, which Mr. Laxton described as being, quote, wearing military fatigues, who had been standing by the craft? In later accounts he gave of this individual, he not only said that this person was wearing military fatigues, he said that there appeared to be some kind of an insignia on the arm patch of the uniform that the individual was wearing. They also were wearing a military-style hat with a bill. They had what appeared to be a flashlight, and they had been examining something on the exterior of the aircraft. And he said that when this man, he didn't describe this person as an alien or as a being, he said this fella, the man, when he saw Laxton pull up and get out of his vehicle, he said he was able to get a good enough look at him that if I saw this guy in a bar, I'd recognize him. So Laxton clearly described seeing a person outside of this very unusual aircraft that had T141 or some similar sequence on the side of the aircraft. And then, keeping in mind, again, this is March 1966, this thing, which is parked in the middle of the road, takes off vertically, and he says it makes a sound that's like a drill running, and then it zooms off into the distance. And he's left standing there thinking, what on earth did I just see? But maybe, just maybe, the story doesn't end there. Laxton, according to the paper here, a former publisher of the Temple Tribune, said he had decided not to say anything about it, but changed his mind after an Oklahoma truck driver, C.W. Anderson of Snyder, said he saw the craft and had seen several like it in the past few months. In fact, I think how it went was Anderson, the truck driver, had been parked by the side of the road, and so as Laxton gets back in his car and he proceeds on down the highway toward the Air Force Base, he sees the truck driver pulled off by the side of the road and thinks, well, this guy had to have seen what I just saw. And so he goes up to the guy and he says, hey, did you just see that? And the truck driver, Mr. Anderson, said, yeah, I did. And in fact, I've seen several like that in the past few months. Presumably, if he was an early morning truck driver driving that route, If there had been early morning experimental tests of some kind of an Air Force technology or anything else happening in that region, sure, Anderson would have been a qualified individual for having multiple UFO sightings. As for Laxton, it had been his first, but as it turns out, he got a really good look at this thing because it was parked in the road and blocking the highway, and he had to get out of his car to try and see what the thing was that was blocking the road, and he happens to see the guy, presumably, who was piloting this thing, a guy with a bill cap and a flashlight, whom he said if I saw him at a bar, I'd recognize him. I'm also assuming Laxton either didn't go to bars very often, or if he did, he never saw this pilot, or at very least that pilot, whomever that was, didn't hang around in bars. Otherwise, Laxton probably would have approached the guy and said, "Hey, did I see you out there in the road that morning?" In any case, this is another one of those really intriguing cases to me because here we have a good UFO report. We would call this, again, a CE-3. There was a landed UFO, and there was an occupant outside the vehicle. But the description by the witness was so good that we have very little doubt that in this case, a highly advanced aircraft of some kind, especially for 1966, had been blocking a roadway in Oklahoma on that morning in question, and a person just happened to be driving by and see it. And he just happened to have stopped and spoken to a truck driver who saw it. And that, of course, helped to prompt Eddie Laxton to come forward and talk about what he saw. But one might have to wonder the various reasons why he might have been hesitant to talk about this. Sure, he might have thought that this was something that people would laugh at him over or that he would be ridiculed for talking about. But again, keep in mind, his actual job had been at the time as an electronics instructor at Shepherd Air Force Base near Wichita Falls. So he worked for the Air Force, and if he had any reason, and really based on his description, he had almost every reason to think that this was some sort of a U.S. experimental technology, if that had been his thinking at the time, Laxton, again being employed at an Air Force base, very well may have worried that what he had seen had been something that shouldn't be talked about. You know, loose lips sink ships type stuff. He may have actually had a patriotic attitude and didn't necessarily at first think coming forward and talking about it would be a good idea, but then when he heard from this truck driver who said, "Yeah, I saw it too," he may have presumed, well, other people saw it and therefore they're going to be talking about it. I might as well do the same. Again, that's speculation on my part, but this case is important because maybe unlike virtually all the other UFO cases we'll look at here, we not only have a description of a very unusual and highly advanced aerospace technology of some kind, but there's also a really good look that the witness got of the pilot. Yes, Lonnie Zamora did see occupants outside the craft that he saw at Socorro 2 years beforehand, but he didn't get a good look at them like Laxton did of this guy outside the thing there near Temple, Oklahoma. So this case in particular probably is one that is the strongest to point in the direction of the U.S. black budget programs, special access programs, and the secretive covert world of breakthrough technologies behind the scenes in the U.S. But again, if what Laxton saw was one of those technologies, we have to take into consideration other things too. What kinds of vertical takeoff aircraft were being developed in the 1960s? Was this aircraft ever revealed publicly? Does that match the character profile of any aircraft that exists today? I mean, things like the Harrier jet come to mind, and Laxton was clear in saying, I know what helicopters look like, and this is not what that was. So what kind of an aircraft, what kind of technology behind an aircraft like that existed way back in 1966? The next case we'll look at, the famous Cash Landrum incident from 1980. This is another one that really could go a couple of different ways. I think a lot of UFO researchers kind of fall on the side of this being a U.S. government secret aircraft. But then again, there were some that I spoke with, like Stanton Friedman, who I asked his thoughts about this case, and he said, well, you know, I worked on nuclear aircraft designs and nuclear propulsion for years. I find it hard to believe that we had some sort of a secret nuclear propulsion technology, and it's never come to light, especially from the perspective of a scientist who worked in that area. But in any case, of course, what happened on that fateful night in December of 1980 had been that Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's grandson Colby were coming back. I think they'd gone to a diner for dinner that night, and as they were coming along this lonely stretch of highway, they see this light in the distance. Eventually, as they get to that point in the road, the object is directly in front of them, ahead and above the highway. Some descriptions of the object were that it was sort of diamond-shaped. That's the most famous description. Some descriptions early on also described it as being balloon-like, in the sense that it was sort of bobbing up and down. Betty Cash stepped out of the vehicle to get a closer look at this object, and famously seemed to suffer very adverse health effects in the days that followed. as did Vicky and her grandson Colby, although they stayed inside the car. They were very concerned, and in fact, they looked at this as though it was the end of the world. Vicky and her grandson, Betty too probably, they were all very religious, and so the experience seeing this object was scary enough to them that they literally considered the second coming as being one interpretation of the phenomena they were observing. That is, of course, until a bunch of helicopters, and what, based on the descriptions they provided, sounded a lot like Chinooks, appear in the general vicinity, and they sort of escort this object out of the area, and it flies off over the trees, accompanied by all these helicopters. Well, because of that, Cash and Landrum decided, well, this must have been some sort of an Air Force technology. But then when they start having symptoms of some kind of sickness, some have speculated about radiation sickness, it remains kind of unclear, and there are some who differ on that point, like researcher Brad Sparks, who has suggested it might have been more like of a chemical kind of exposure that they were suffering symptoms from. But in any case, Cash and Landrum go to the Air Force and they say, we think we were injured by something y'all were testing, and we need help. And the Air Force essentially says, well, we didn't have any aircraft in the area at that time. It wasn't ours. And this led to a lawsuit, noted UFO attorney Peter Gersten representing the witnesses and trying to assist them in getting help after what occurred. Well, eventually the case was dropped, and the main reason had been that there was no evidence that ever surfaced that could account for military helicopters being in the area that night. Again, this was over the Christmas holiday. There were no training exercises that took place. There was no way that they could account for those helicopters being in that area at that time, let alone that many of them. No military air bases in the area had that number of helicopters. None were operational that night. So here again, we have an incident involving an anomalous aerospace vehicle of some kind and a number of U.S. aircraft. It would be hard to argue that these had been alien spacecraft mimicking Chinook helicopters. Betty and Vicky certainly didn't think that's what they were. No, they thought it was some sort of a U.S. test. And yet we've never been able to find out where those helicopters came from. Now, why is that significant? Even if we were to assume that the Cash Landrum incident involves some kind of a U.S. experimental technology, something from within the black world that was being tested, or, in fact, for that matter, if it involved an actual genuine extraterrestrial craft, the fact that all these military helicopters were out there and yet remain unaccounted for is strongly suggestive of some kind of a covert U.S. military operation. This is not something that the Air Force or the Army was able to account for and say, oh gosh, yeah, actually we did have a bunch of our helicopters out that night. That was us. No evidence ever surfaced directly linking this to any kind of known military component. Think back again to what Bill Sweetman was talking about. A shadow military within the world of black programs that exists completely unacknowledged, but which is funded and which is developing all the experimental technologies. You remember those pearls too precious to wear. So I can't help but wonder, is that what Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Colby Landrum saw on that fateful night back in December of 1980? Did they happen to be at the right place at the wrong time, and they just happened to have witnessed some sort of an experimental U.S. technology? Another intriguing point about Cash Landrum. Anybody who ever heard the first appearance of former Air Force Office of Special Investigations Special Agent Rick Doty when he went on the Art Bell radio show Coast to Coast AM alongside noted author Greg Bishop? Bishop had just published his book, Project Beta, another must-read, by the way, for anybody out there who's not read it. But Greg went on Coast to Coast and he told Art Bell, hey, I might be able to get Rick Doty to come on with me. And he calls Rick Doty up. Doty, of course, the former agent who, according to the story outlined by Greg in his book, Project Beta, had been the one who was tasked with providing disinformation to Paul Benowitz. Why? Because Paul Benowitz at that time had been detecting signals from around Kirtland Air Force Base. He thought they were UFOs. Turns out it was actually some tests the NSA was doing, and it was decided at that time, hey, let's mislead him into thinking, guess what? That these are actually UFOs, since that's what he already thinks they are, and that way he won't pick up on the fact that we're doing some tests out here. Special Agent Rick Doty also, depending on who you ask, may have been connected to the MJ-12 documents. Again, Linda Moulton Howe was shown very similar documents or information similar to the information that appeared in those documents after they were leaked to Jamie Shandera, and Linda Howe said it had been Rick Doty who showed that information to her, provided these documents to her in a room, let her sit there and read them, but she couldn't leave with them. She could just sit and read them while she was there in the room. Well, coming back to the appearance on Art Bell with Greg Bishop that night, if you listen to that interview all the way to the end, right as they are closing out the show, rather tantalizingly, Rick Doty tosses into the mix that he has run disinformation on other cases too, and acknowledges that one of the people he had done disinformation on had been, you guessed it, Linda Moulton Howe. And further, at the very end of the show, he says, and one other case I did disinformation on had been the Cash Landrum case. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why would you have had to do disinformation on the Cash Landrum case if that didn't involve some sort of a U.S. special technology? Good question, right? And then the final case we'll look at, the St. Clair Triangle CE1, which we mentioned earlier. This occurred again on January 5th, the same date as the publication date of the article by Bill Sweetman. The big black triangle UFOs are an enigma within a mystery, we might say, because even among the broader collected data involving UFOs, black triangle UFOs are a remarkable subcategory to themselves. And again, I have to reference the excellent work of David Marler. Obviously, I've mentioned him several times already, and I'm a bit biased because some of the historical work that he and I do together and have done over the years, and in fact, I hope to do some more here in the near future. But David, with his book Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation, looks not only at the Triangle incident over St. Clair County from January 2000, but he also dives into the history of triangle UFO sightings. And I have to say that my initial feelings about that incident had been that there was some sort of an experimental U.S. technology that was possibly being tested that night. There are various reasons that we really don't have time to get into right now in terms of why I thought that might be the case. But in fairness, we also have to acknowledge that looking deeper into the history of UFOs, as David Marler has done, he notes that there have been sightings of triangular UFOs for a much longer time. So the idea put forward by many UFO researchers that they are a fairly new development in UFOs and that these triangular UFOs only started appearing in the 1980s or 90s, and therefore they're probably some sort of a U.S. experimental technology that may not necessarily be the best explanation. And in fact, with the launch of the UAP Sightings Reporting System, which is a UAP sightings database I personally have been running, and which you can find at uapsightings.org. If you've seen a UAP, you can actually submit a report of your own, and I highly recommend that you do so. But again, I too have collected some historical triangle sightings that corroborate, in my opinion, the same kind of findings that David has made in terms of the deeper history of the triangular UFO sightings. So can we necessarily say that big black triangles are some secretive U.S. technology? Some of them may be. Are all of them necessarily that? Based on the deeper history of the phenomenon, that seems highly unlikely. But is it possible that some UAP sightings involving triangular UAP have inspired some actual U.S. black budget programs and some technologies that resemble that class of UAP, and so some of them are ours, and some may be more genuinely anomalous? Again, that's also possible. So in conclusion, we are left with a number of possibilities. And in my opinion, yes, there's a good case to be made that some UAP do originate from the black budget world, and they are our own technologies. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that they were designed entirely independent of the idea of UAP or even maybe certain acquisitions of foreign capabilities. But finally, I do think that a deeper look at some of history's best cases certainly points to the idea of a black world component, and it very well may be that the so-called legacy program can be evidenced by the shadows that we can find right there in the history of UFO sightings. And some of history's best cases very well may point to the possibility of a legacy program involving some technologies that could very well be from a little closer to home than many would have thought. And so that essentially wraps things up. Our final considerations, really, in light of everything we've heard there, I do think that looking back at some classic UAP cases does suggest a component involving the so-called black budget world in the United States government. And I think that really it warrants a reevaluation of some of those cases. That is not to say, of course, that all UAP are secret government programs. It certainly is suggestive that some of them might be. It's also not to say that the government has been involved in the acquisition of flying saucer crash recoveries for years and that they're hiding all the secrets in the bodies at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I don't know. But what I am saying is certainly there are connections between the black budget world, the world of special access programs, some of which are unacknowledged, and the ongoing UAP mystery. And we have to look at that and actually scrutinize it very carefully. So with that, as Race knows, I've got another engagement this afternoon. I've got to take off. I do want to thank you again, Race Hobbs, and of course, all of our speakers who are going to be presenting today. You have a great event that awaits here at the UFO Audit, so thank you.
Micah, thank you. Aerial phenomena, evaluating the enigma. What a great talk, my friend. The host of the thought-provoking Truth Mechanism, the Micah Hanks radio program. Listening to this guy anytime you get the chance to. And when he picks up a guitar, folks, you best grab a beer and have a seat, because this guy can go. He's just so talented on so many levels. Micah Hanks, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here, Micah. We're going to take a quick break, everybody, so you can refresh your beverage and grab you a snack, because we are going to sit down with John Burrough when we come back. Got to get used to all of these new controls. I hope everybody's having a great Saturday so far. Thank you all for joining us here and on this beautiful Saturday in March, here at the very end of March. And I hope wherever you are, everything is very, very well. We've got John Burrough standing by ready to go for UFO Audit, which you are watching the very first of the 4-part series for 2026 right here from the UnX Network. I want to thank you all for joining us. For those of you that are new or newer to the subject and don't know much about the incident in 1980 in Suffolk, England, John Burrough is a retired U.S. Air Force security police veteran. He's a native of Illinois. He's enlisted in the United States Air Force way back in 1979, and he served more than 26 years in military and federal law enforcement. In June 1979, Burrough was assigned to RAF Bentwaters in Suffolk, England, where he served as a base security policeman during the height of the Cold War. His duties included line security, flight line security, weapons storage, area protection, basic law enforcement patrol type stuff. And then he went on to specialized canine operations. He received formal training and certification as a military working dog handler in both narcotics detection and explosives detection, supporting base security, anti-sabotage operations, and Air Force protection missions. On the night of December, that what we're really getting to, December 25th, December 26th in 1980, Burrough accompanied then Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston in response to reports of unusual lights in the Rendlesham Forest adjacent to the base, just outside the East Gate. What began as a routine security investigation of possible aircraft crash on the base, or possibly a base intrusion involved in one of the most widely documented and debated UAP incidents in modern history, an event that would profoundly shape the rest of John's life. I've known John for many of years, and he's here today to talk with me because John tells it like it is, much like myself, at the detriment of our own. I mean, we get in trouble for it every time we open our mouth. To tell the truth, to stay on track, not hop from one case to a next, but just to try to find out what happened to you and your fellow airmen on that night, or those nights, I should say, has been the main focus and the main drive behind everything John Burroughs has ventured into when it comes to UFO UAP. And he's been in the guts of all of it. And there's still those that are still trying to pull him in to Washington, D.C. Let's just get to it. I won't waffle on any longer about this wonderful man that's my friend. He's my colleague, and it's an honor to know him. And I thank him for his service all the time, and I'll thank him again today for his service to our great nation. Let's go grab John Burroughs real quick. Welcome, John Burroughs. Thanks again for taking the time on your Saturday to come hang out with us here at UFO Audit. I truly appreciate it, my friend.
I'm going to enjoy the next hour, Race.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. You know, we're all gathered here to talk a little bit about the status of the current status of the UFO movement as it is. We talked a little bit about the past. We're talking a little bit about today and maybe where all of this is going, but certainly there are a lot of irons in the fire, as it were. And there's a lot of controllers and controlled and a lot of rumor mill disclosure chatter going on. And of course, with the president of the United States talking about, just putting a task force together and going after all these documents and stuff and what we can get out there and, and get released. I'm just going to jump right into these questions. I put some together, and then, we're taking some from the viewers as well. So I'm going to start with this because with you and I have had many, many, many backroom conversations and phone conversations about this current UAP disclosure movement being driven by something. And, is it national security? Is it defense contractors, private technology companies? What do you think is driving the current UFO UAP movement today?
Well, let's maybe need to clarify. What do you mean by movement driving it? Do you mean the government side of it or the civilian side of it?
I would say the civilian side of it. And then we can go into the government side of it if that's where you want to go.
Sure. Okay.
There is certainly something pushing things along. We've been in this long enough. Certainly you've been in it since the 80s. I've been in it since the 90s, and you're an experiencer on the whole other side of a fence that I can't see through. So, I think your perception being from a military background is it's very instrumental, in where I kind of find myself shaping how I see things the way that they are.
Okay. Well, I'll take the military side is Department of War now, they call it, even though it's not legally been approved by Congress.
Right.
But so for this conversation, I'll call them the Department of War. Okay, you've got them. And then a separate sideshow is the defense contractors, which I don't group them in the civilian side. So I'm going to take out the first part, what I'm going to talk about. I take out the, defense contractors and the Department of War. And in that group of defense contractors, I'm going to put people like Bigelow, Put-Off, and the people that have worked as contractors inside the Department of War, or for the most part, Department of Defense up until recently. So they don't count. So if we're just going to go from the civilian side of this, it's chaos, because I look at ufology like I look at sports. You got all these experts that run around talking about what they think they know, and they know so little. And what I mean by know so little is simply the fact that they all have their own agendas. The genuine person within this feels that we have the right to know. But I don't know if they've taken enough time to really consider what the ramifications of what they want to know is. Do we really want to know? They all think we're ready for it, but you just have to look at the state of the world right now where we're at each other's throats. We can't agree on anything. We're arguing and fighting. So let's just throw in the alien card on top of everything else. So you have that group that genuinely just wants to know, and they don't have a lot of avenues to turn to. And what I mean by that is when you go down to it, there are no scientific panels out there or panels or groups that talk about this seriously, period. And then what I mean by that is the people that you would go to that are from the scientific community and everything else that are putting out evidence and information that can be confirmed and talked about. So what they have to do is rely on the internet, podcasts, and everything else. So when you go into the podcast side of it, there's some good podcasts out there. There's some good researchers and people that have worked on this over the years, but they're still trying to make a living off of this. So there's a lot of sensationalism in it and stuff. Then I put the last group in the civilian side that are experiencers, people like me. And I, for one, have always wanted to know what happened at Rendlesham. So I struck out on what I call a mission since the last 20 years to try and figure out how what happened to Rendlesham ties into everything. And there's a lot of other people that do the same thing. And they just genuinely like to know. But that doesn't mean that they feel that knowing is going to be the best thing for the rest of the world. They just want to know. So do you think that pretty much covers the civilian end of it, Race?
I think so. Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay. All right.
For certain, that military side, though, that rabbit hole is a vast one.
Right. And let's just start, forget about the defense companies. Let's just go right into the Department of War, okay? And I say this straight up. Everybody sits there and wants to know everything about what we're dealing with, how it's operational and everything going on, okay?
Right.
I firmly believe, well, you just have to look at just this current operations going on in the Middle East and the new technology coming online and everything else. It's a whole different level of technology. It's changing warfare. It's being utilized in battle for the first time. There's still kinks being worked on and everything else. So the first question is did it come from somewhere else? Or did we just develop it naturally over the years? But I go to this. If you want to say that it is based off of UAP technology, which I put in a different category from UFOs. I don't put UAP technology and UFOs in the same category because UAPs are a different type of intelligence over what a UFO has been presented to us and what the general public people believe, okay? But let me ask the audience to stop and think about this. Do we have a clue on any modern technology how it actually works? We know stealth works because they tell us it works, and it works, it's invisible to radar at certain points and all that. But we really don't know how stealth works. It's all classified material. Everything behind it, how they've learned how to make it, integrate it, and utilize it is all classified. So if you just take that part of it, whether that's alien technology or our technology, why does anybody really think the Department of Defense is going to allow whatever they've learned, whether it's just we made it ourselves or they've made it using UAP technology, are they going to divulge what they know about it or how they've came up to know about it or how they're going to utilize it or are utilizing it? Okay. Now I'll go to the defense industry. The defense industry is there for one reason, to make money. Okay. Oh, they may wave their flags and say they're patriotic, but ultimately their bottom line is their bottom line. And what they do is every day they compete with other defense companies to try to get a contract from the government because it's the most lucrative thing out there. there's more money to spend on defense than in any part of the rest of our budget, other than now we're paying more in interest, which partly is because we spent so much on defense over the years.
Right.
So they're all battling for that dollar. So, and they also all play the game. They don't want any of the other companies to know what they have. It's not compartmentalized within the whole defense network.
Yeah.
It's each company's working for a contract, because ultimately whoever gets a contract for the planes or whatever else is the one that hits the gravy train. And the other one's on the outside trying to get in the door on something else.
John, do you really think that the income stream, the budgets that we know about that are available for that are the same budgets available for these ultra black projects?
Well, then again, you go into that, which if you just have to do the research on it, the black budget SAP programs that are out there, they have no oversight by Congress. They don't. I mean, even the Republicans have come out and said they vote on a funding amount. This classified project needs 10 billion or 20 billion. Are you going to approve it or not approve it? So they have no access to these projects. So they have no idea what they're funding, other than they're giving 10 billion, 20 billion, whatever, to a particular project. There's no oversight, and there's only a select small amount of people that are on a list that even have any knowledge or access to the projects. Okay?
I didn't even know how that worked. And I'm almost ashamed to say this, until I saw the movie with Tom Hanks called Charlie Wilson's War, where he describes to his CIA cohort how voting is done without anybody knowing what they're voting for. And they push appropriations through. And that's exactly how people should go about it. They go there and find out how these things are done. Step by step, how if you get the speaker in lockstep with you, you can get the funding you need or increases in the funding you already have. But man,
well, right, and the only group that has any knowledge of this is the Gang of Eight. Okay, they get briefed on some of this, but overall, there's no oversight. So they're running these projects. Now, the other thing that stands out that you can go online and say, because funnily, I'm going to bring this up because it started becoming more knowledgeable back right before 9/11. When Rumsfeld went to the Hill, I think it was the day before, correct me if I'm wrong, and he testified that the Pentagon can't account for $9 trillion, I think it was at that point. And so right after when 9/11 hit and all the documents got destroyed during 9/11, some of them were stored, the Pentagon area that got hit, those records were destroyed, the backups were in Building 7, they got destroyed. So they had no accountability for that $9 trillion. Now it's something like 18 to 20 trillion. And they passed a law, I don't know, it was several years ago, where all agencies had to be audited. DOD's never passed an audit. And the reason why is simply they can't audit the black projects. So they don't even know. Again, there's no oversight. So when Congress yells and screams and says they want to know, they really want to know, because they don't know. They really are all locked out, maybe except a few. And even then, they probably don't know that much, because most of them, or I doubt if any of them, are on any list that has actually access to these classified access programs, SAP programs.
Yeah, I remember Byrd calling it out, Rumsfeld saying, the DOD's own auditors, it was y'all's auditors that could not find this money.
Right.
And then a day later, the two places where all those documents are kept get wiped out.
Yep, they did, both of them. Pentagon and the Building 7. And then they want you to believe they have no other records. So, but they continue to do that.
That specific part of the Pentagon.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like 5% of the entire facility. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, and it really begs. Listen, we've got some questions on it. We've got a viewer question. This one comes from Mike D in Waxahachie, Texas, right outside of Dallas, Fort Worth. He says, why, and this is a great question, why has Congress continued funding UAP programs like Arrow despite repeated reports stating there is no confirmed non-human technology? What exactly is Congress funding? Investigation, surveillance, expansion, or sensor development? That's a good question, Mike.
Well, right, but most of that's classified. But here I can tell you a little bit about my personal experience with Congress and
right. Do it.
Okay, but before I go there,
you're going to answer the phone.
No, I'm going to clear it. But anyway, you got to go back and look at what Congress is doing right now with this. Okay, number one, it did just come out that they're considering defunding Arrow. I think so. This has struck a nerve. It struck a nerve. It struck a nerve with Congress. But I think you understand this, Race, but I wonder if your audience does, right? The problem is that Congress isn't serious about this. And when I say that, the upper echelon are not serious about this becoming public. What's being done by Congress is by a subcommittee. Comer's not involved. He's given it to Luna, which is a subcommittee of he's in charge. There's no subpoena power. There's nothing going on that will lead you to any serious answers or revelations. And anytime, even when they hold these hearings, and I can't think of the guy's name, maybe you can. There was one guy that stuck out to me in the last hearings. He gave a good presentation, and he told Congress this, which I thought was pretty. It was true, but as Congress, it had to hurt. He said that there's anything of value I can't talk to you about in the open. I'm going to have to go behind closed doors. And he said, but on top of that, even if we got a skiff, I guarantee you the majority of what I've had exposure to, you wouldn't have the clearance for me to tell you what I know.
Wow.
So that is the fact. So to me, it's not that Congress doesn't want to know at all, or they want to understand what they're missing or not being told about, or where the money's going, or anything else. And some of them have legitimate reasons to want to know if we're alone or not. But the point is this isn't serious. It's not serious. The only way it would ever be serious would be if it was the full committee with Comer and they started subpoenaing people in and at least putting them under oath. And then giving a report, even if they go in a classified setting, giving some kind of summary of what's discussed in the classified setting. But they know they can't do that because it's classified. So therefore, they know the majority of the stuff that matters in this is classified, and therefore it's never going to see the light of day unless we get to the last point was, will President Trump declassify certain information? And that's never been established, which it caught my attention when he did that particular day when this all kind of came about. First, the Obama interview, then he came out, and that was all staged on Air Force One with Fox. Fox did a lot of stuff on it from that day all the way the rest of the day. And of course, in the world of what's going on right now, I call it Trump world, it went away anyway. The only way that could have continued on is if everything else was the same, and we've had 10 different things go crazier than what Trump said that day on Air Force One, with the war and everything else. But ultimately, who's the ones making these decisions to declassify any material? Because I don't know if you're aware of this, Race, but the gaining unit that holds whatever information is classified has to sign off on it before it can be declassified. And let's just say I worked in that unit. I can't talk about any of that to anybody unless they sign off on it and give me authorization to talk about it. So you have all these agencies that, whatever amount there are, that have information on all this stuff, right? They have to agree to release this to be declassified before it can be declassified. And the odds are the majority of whatever they hold is never going to see the light of day.
Did that happen to you in the Rendlesham deal?
I want to be careful the way I put this, okay? I'll deflect a little bit to what Colonel Halt just told me on the phone 3 days ago. I told him and I asked him, I said, I'd like to have your opinion on what you feel about Rendlesham as far as, do you think it'll ever see the light of day? And he told me directly, no. What happened to us will never, ever see the light of day. They don't want it to come out. They don't want it to go anywhere because of the seriousness of it. And the fact is that, and this is what he kind of cracked me up. He said, and if some reason something comes out about it, he's going to be unavailable from that point going forward. All right. Now, go to my case. I got contacted from inside the Gang of Eight. And the new book I'm going to put out is going to have the emails and everything else. So people can sit there and say, I'm making it up. But it's real. I really had an interaction with and it was interesting. The person that I was dealing with was a contractor that was outside of a normal A inside Congress. So this person was a contractor working for the Gang of Eight that approached me, and then Pat was involved, my lawyer. And they wanted me to come up and meet with Arrow, and then they wanted me to meet with the Gang of Eight. And I told him before I would consider it, go look up Rendlesham and find out what you can find out about it. And he set up a meeting a couple of weeks, maybe it was a month, I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the emails. And he came back and he told us that he went to look for Rendlesham and he didn't have access to where Rendlesham would be. And that means that this guy claimed he had one of the higher clearances. So that means that not only is what happened to Rendlesham classified, but it's an SAP program, just like Kit Green did. Because you remember that statement Kit Green put out about my settlement with the VA, and he said that part of the reason why my stuff's classified because it ties to SAP programs. So if you're not on the list to view a particular program or programs, SAP programs, you don't have access to the data, right? So that was my first thing, so I declined coming up. The second part is I was approached again and was talked to about Rendlesham, and I said, go to the VA and ask them the status of my records. Find out, did they settle with me, which I have the proof that they did, and it's going to come out in the book, and why they settled with me, but have them put it in writing why they settled with me. And because you can only get a disability settlement with the VA, it has to relate to a particular incident or something that happened to you in the military. You have to provide the evidence. You have to support the evidence, okay? And then they have to rule on the evidence and then grant you the disability. So I challenged them to do that, and they never did. Whatever happened to Rendlesham's locked down, okay? And it's still locked down to this day.
It makes me wonder if not all of it, part of it was illegal.
Well, there's a lot of signs, and some of them will be addressed in the book, that if you know the history of what the government's worked on technology-wise, it goes back to, you have to go all the way back to MK Ultra, and the CIA got busted for it. And then they supposedly destroyed all the records and shut the programs down. Well, they didn't. They sent it all over to the United Kingdom, and they went over to their defense contractors. And they were working on all this technology over
Suffice
in
it to say, everybody was. The great technology grab and scientific information grab and medical information grab, everything they could get their paws on at the close of the Second World War in Germany.
Yeah, you go back to the Germans.
All of that. I mean, because the Germans started MK Ultra. They were the ones that perfected it.
Right. Well, they were the first ones for psychological warfare. So it goes forward with that. So could it be some of it, what happened over there and what happened afterwards was illegal? Sure. There's no doubt. But then you have to go into the legalities of it, which means you have to go into, because they can tie everything up with national security. Like, people will tell me that there's no way my medical records can be classified, even if they're in the military. Yeah, they can. If they're tied if they're tied to a classified program, I don't have access to them. And only people that have the clearance or the need to know how to treat me have the ability to be told what they need to know to do it. And that's what's going on with the VA overall. That certain doctors have the ability to know enough about what, maybe not where it happened, how it happened, but what I was exposed to, so they can treat me and keep me alive, which I've been kept alive for over a decade now. But so this is all, Rendlesham's all tied up.
Thank God I'm out of
Yeah, but Rendlesham's all tied up in all that. So it's definitely been classified as a UAP case. I mean, Project Condign did that. They said we were exposed to UAP radiation. Okay. So now you have to really define the difference between a UAP and a UFO. Okay. And Condign did a lot of that, which nobody really wanted to look at. Nobody in ufology wanted to touch it because the majority of the people, at least maybe it's changing a little bit now, still think there's a craft coming from somewhere else that's coming down here and visiting us. When in fact, how they changed it, what they called it and everything else to UAPs is probably a lot closer to what we're dealing with. And Condign called it intelligent in nature and everything else. So this was the declassified stuff that they did from Condign. There's still stuff classified in Condign to this day. I've tried to breach some of that recently and got stonewalled by the MOD. But the point being is all this is locked up in the classified world. So you really get to the strong point of, goes back to when we started, we don't know the majority of how our technology works, and we're okay with that. Basically the public seems to be okay with it. You don't see anybody yelling and screaming, I want to know how the stealth fighter works, and they accept the fact that it's all comes down to national security, but somehow they think that they deserve, and the government's going to tell them what they know about, what we're dealing with, UAP, UFO, whatever you want to call it.
I'm going to take this moment real quick, John, because we're just about halfway through our talk. I want to do a quick announcement. Everybody knows this is for free. The Unexplained Network put this out for all of you. We're going to do quarterly free virtual presentations for all of you throughout the year. About every 3 months, we'll be doing one, and they'll all have different themes. But the Unexplained Network, for all of you who are new to the Unexplained Network, we put this out there all over the place, and we know a lot of you are first-time viewers here. And I just want to say that the Unexplained Network delivers quality paranormal and alternative talk radio and video streaming programs, topics ranging from alternative research, breakthrough technology, ghosts, cryptids, UFOs, all of that fun stuff, consciousness, hidden mysteries, and ancient history that has been suppressed from us. So there's conspiracies. There's a lot of really cool content here, and our listeners can interact, help investigative journalists sleuth out answers to questions in real time. Researchers, authors, hosts all work together. It's our goal is really to reach critical thinkers, really, and we want to go worldwide, around the world, to get to you and bring you the content that you can mentally chew on and investigate and find out where your answers are, and turn right around and bring that back to the world. It's a very reciprocal, user-friendly kind of a platform, and you listen to us and we listen to you, and it works really well. Visit the unexplainednetwork.com. Margie has the magazine, the blog, the newsletters, there's news, there's all kinds of really cool stuff over there, as well as the conference connection and everything else. So make sure you avail yourself to the unexplainednetwork.com and go see what all is over there and what all it has to offer for those of you with an interest in everything that we do here. Might want to grab, while I'm thinking about it, the quarterly magazine is one of the best periodical coffee table magazines you're going to find. There have been some good ones in the past. Intrepid magazine, Open Minds had a really great magazine for a while. Margie still has the UnX magazine rolling strong. So run over to the website, take a look at the magazine as well, get that information. You can get a free e-copy. You can register for a free e-copy just by becoming a free member. There are memberships over there at different rates. We would appreciate you considering. a paid membership, monthly membership, reoccurring. That helps us do what we do. And on top of that, you're going to get a printed copy of the magazine, which is really cool, man. I can't keep them on my coffee table. Every time I put one out, it's there 2-3 weeks. People come over. Are you done with this? And then they take it. So unexplainednetwork.com. Now back to the program. John, the UAP hearings that's going on in Congress, they're structured to, do you think they're structured to discover the truth, or have they been more of a function of just public events that just justify new defense spending and or surveillance infrastructure? What do you think about these hearings? What is the purpose behind them?
Well, I think for starters, there's some people in there. Luna was in the Air Force, I guess, had an experience that, number one, don't want to be stonewalled, at least privately, and they're being stonewalled first, both publicly and privately. They want a better understanding of what are we dealing with and where's our money going and everything else. So they want all that. So I think it started kind of with what happened with To the Stars, then the New York Times article and everything else. It did its job of getting the public to start looking at this more seriously. Some of them are taking this more seriously, but those are the outsiders, I call them. They're the ones that don't have the access to the inside that only a few do. And like I said, the Gang of Eight. So, and Comer did say, run with the hearings. So, but he quickly pawned it off to a subcommittee, and again, no subpoena power or anything else. So I think that they honestly are trying to get some kind of acknowledgement, but if they have any sense at all, they have to know that anything of value, basically just off the hearings that they've had and done, is anything of value is classified. And they don't have the authority to force it to be declassified. And the odds are most likely it won't be declassified. So when you get right down to it, it does draw attention to the fact that the public is having stuff and Congress is had stuff held back for them. It does gain some traction for these defense contractors to, get some traction inside to move forward with their technology and stuff. But at the same time, this legitimately isn't going to go anywhere where it's going now, unless somehow these agencies declassify certain pieces of material that actually have some substance to it. And I mean, I'll ask you, Race, what do you think the chances are they'll do that?
Slim.
Right.
Slim just left town.
So they're yelling and screaming that it's the president's fault, but is it? I mean, there's secrets that are kept by these agencies. They hold the cards in the power. And if people believe that the president can declassify anything, which is true, but he has to have it in his hands and see it to declassify it. Right. And if it's never given to him, then he can't do anything with it. Now, again, he gave it to the Department of War HECSPED. And so HECSPED's only going to be able to look at what these agencies want to let him look at. Because I guarantee you, this guy has no idea what UFOs are all about. And what I mean by that is he may know there's some technology that's being utilized in the war or being developed, but I guarantee you if it's got anything to do with UAPs or anything else, he knows no more about that than anybody else because they don't have the need to know. Most of the people that are in these jobs don't have the need to know. It's only a limited group of people inside these agencies, to include the ones that are working on this technology, that have any idea of what we're dealing with and what's going on. And then therefore, this has also hurt the credibility of this, because all these people come forward and say, trust us, bro, it's there. But then there's no information being exposed to support what they're telling us is going on. And that's part of what Rendlesham's about. And that's why I told them, get the VA to admit in writing that they gave me my settlement based on the evidence that we presented, which is all about Rendlesham and UAP technology and stuff. Get them to admit that in writing, and now you have more than me just telling the public. We have evidence to support the government is aware of something going on involving UAPs, and I cannot just talk about it, but we have hard evidence to lay in front of Congress and the public. And that nobody in Congress will do that. None of these people will either do it or can do it because they don't have access to it in the first place.
But I think most of them are just catching up. I don't think most of them people in Congress had a clue about the UFO topic at all. And, Tim and all these guys, they're just in a rush to catch up. And they've been for a couple of years now, several years now. But, one of my big bitches about all of this going on right now is like the Ross Coulthard, even Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, and these cats that are just clickbait hustlers anymore are really just dancing on the fringes to make money and influence people. And they don't think they can be influenced. That's the thing. Is who's influencing the influencers anymore? And is any of this shit even matter?
Well, I can be honest with you, Corbell and Knapp have no idea what's going on. And I say that not to make fun of them or be mean about them. They have no access to any of this stuff.
I got one name, Bill Moore. Go back, everybody, and research that man's name, William Moore. That guy thought he had the inside track on a whistleblower insider, and that guy was just playing him. And when he found out about it, he tried to tell us about it, and everybody turned against him.
And there's a guy from Arkansas that's passed recently. You heard of his name, Bob Emmenegger?
Bob Emmenegger just lived 40 minutes.
Yeah, he was supposed to be taken in and shown. It was going to be shown. I don't know if he was shown a video of aliens at Holloman and all that. He was involved in UFO cover-up live and all this other stuff.
He was making a film, and he was going to be allowed to use the landing of a UFO at Holloman Airport. He saw it. He had it in the film, and at the last minute, they removed all of it, but like 8-9 seconds.
Right. I met him personally. He was involved in some of this stuff early on because I was originally just gotten out of active the first time in '88, and that's when UFO Cover-Up Live was coming out, and they wanted to drag me into that, and then the executive producer talked me out of it. I didn't really want to do it anyway, but he talked me out of it, and then they were going to look at something differently, all having to do with technology, and that kind of went sidetracked for years. But the point is, there's only a few people that have talked that have, Gary Nolan, he's clueless as far as I'm concerned. And what I mean by clueless, he has no clearance that I'm aware of inside the Department of War, Department of Defense. There are two people that I've dealt with that do and have and still probably do. That's Hal Puthoff and Christopher Green. Those guys were the real deal. They had access and probably are still working. I believe both of them are still working with the DODs to this day. They understand how these programs work, including Puthoff ran Project Stargate. So they understand how these programs work, and they have had access to these different programs and everything else. So when they say something, you better listen. Everybody else is on the outside, just like I am. And I'm in it. I'm on the outside. I saw some stuff in the military in '80. I had something happen to me. I saw stuff through my career that I can't add up. But I don't have access to classified material and stuff like those guys did. And I do have some experiences and listening to them and stuff. And I found stuff, including declassified information, including some help from a guy by the name of James Worrell. But I don't understand everything in the inner workings. But all these guys come out and tell you they do, and yet they don't. The only other person that may or may not, because we've never been able to confirm exactly what he did for the Department of Defense, was Lou Elizondo. But I put him in the same category as Richard Doty. They were both in there for a reason. They both did the same job just years later, and I think you know what that job was, right? Right. So you can't totally trust what they have to say either, because that was what they were. That's what they did.
Yeah.
So there's very few people out there that have come forward that, and I should put Eric Davis in there. He had clearances and worked inside government. Those are the few that
I'm sure Gary Nolan has. He has a small nest of phone numbers in his phone from DOD officials and military.
Yeah, but there's a difference. I've talked to DOD officials.
I know.
Having an inside a program and know how it works and knows what's going on. There's a difference, is all I'm getting at.
Yeah. And that is, and because my point where I was going is they never fail to reach out and touch those that they think are sniffing around things that they need to know what they're doing, closely know what they're doing. And, that's something I think that Jacques Vallée maybe found out a long time ago, and many others, of course, even good old J. Allen Hynek, but we're talking about two different monsters. Even the guerrilla back then that they were dealing with in the early days, Keyhole and all them, it's different than the one we have today.
Well, what's interesting, if you look at Arrow today and back when those guys were around, Hynek and Carl Sagan were supposedly convinced of something, and for whatever reason, what they said publicly and what they believed privately was different. And you just have to go to Arrow and stuff, and you have to look at Arrow, and you have to question if some of the same stuff isn't going on. But you can't. Here's the thing, Race. If you are under NDA, SAP, you work in an SAP program, or you work with the program, you have access to this stuff, and it's national defense in nature, you can't talk about it. You can't.
Yeah.
And not only that, even if you talk about it, if you don't have the documents to support it, again, it's conjecture. It's not, there's no proof. There's only one guy.
Do you think that that's what happened to people like Lou Elizondo and this Grosh and them?
I think I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, these guys, they come out with all of this amazing information that everybody has been waiting to hear from somebody official, but they don't have shit in their pocket to prove it. Nothing.
Well, they do and they don't, because here's what they do. Well, they do have the proof. They know there's proof there on what's going on. And I'm not saying it's alien or not. I'm just saying they've been inside enough. Elizondo, you can say that Doty was. They were put in there for counter intel for a reason. They want the other side. And people say, how? Go back to the World War II. Go back to the nuclear bomb. They ran two separate programs. They found out this one particular, the nuclear bomb wasn't going to work, but they made it look like the program existed. They had it was more funded and had more people working on it to mislead the Russians down a whole different path. And then they developed the bomb that they ended up developing and utilizing, set the Russians back years. And by the time the Russians got their first nuclear bomb, we were already 5-8 years of more advanced weaponry in the nuclear programs. So these guys are there to mess with the Chinese and the Russians to this day, to make them think we have things that we don't have or whatever. I mean, that's all counter intel. That's why I'm saying Lou is the old Richard Doty. Doty was part of the program to mislead the Russians, who were the bigger players back then. Now it's the Chinese. So that's all going on too. And like they say, and that's one of the things that always sticks with me, they show these grainy videos that says there's something there, yet we have the technology to show a lot better stuff when they want to with war zones and everything else, but they can't show this. So, it goes back to, there is different information going on for the other side, and then they're not going to show what we have exactly. And it does go back to sensors and everything else, because all that's advancing, exponentially. So all this is a game, and it's into one big pot. And realistically, Congress, for the most part, has no clue to what's going on.
Right. Yeah, it's a game of catch up for sure. That brings me to a quick. We've got about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Before we have to wrap. Viewer question from Teresa in: how much influence do private companies such as SpaceX and Starlink and Anduril and defense contractors have on UAP narrative presented to Congress and to the public?
Oh, that's a real quick, easy answer. A lot. They are the ones who develop the technology. Anything that goes on stays with them, so it's not subject to FOIA. You can't, if it's not in the DoD database or the Department of War database, then it's outside the realms of FOIA, because that's one of the FOIA answers you get all the time. It goes to a third party, which is the contractors. So you don't have access to it, and you can't find out what's going on. And if you look, a lot of the people that work inside the Department of War end up getting jobs out in the private industry. So they control a lot of this, and they control it even more because there's plenty. The contract companies are bigger than they've ever been, and they do a lot more things across the board. As far as even they have their own security units, and like they have an equivalent Delta Force, basically. That they do all kinds of things for the government that keeps it outside of the hands of the government, So they play a huge influence.
Agreed. Let me ask you this. Why do you think every time we hear from some official from the government, they're from intelligence or counterintelligence? Can't we ever just hear from like an admiral or a general? I was thinking about what you were talking about a while ago about compartmentalization and all. Back when they had when Greer had the disclosure, well, the team that had started the disclosure project, and then Greer. I remember there was a brigadier general. I can't remember his name right offhand, but I remember him talking about being presented a piece of material from a craft that was not from this earth. And him and a handful of other people that were there with him all observed it, held it, looked at it and everything. And they know it exists, but it's a bunch of non-elected officials, let's say, let's do air quotes, officials that are the gatekeepers of all of this technology. And that's one thing that I actually agree with that John Alexander presented years ago. And that is that there's no huge department in the military or in the government that's investigating UFOs. It's very compartmentalized. It's very tiny, teeny tiny, small.
Well, no, he's probably right. And again, he would know. He's another guy that I left off the list that, he worked with Los Alamos and everything else. So he's another guy that has his hands all over this. But again, if you listen to these guys, they always play the double switch, the double speak. They never give you a straight answer. Now, partly they can't, but it all goes back to where we're going with this. Do you have maybe one more question and I can summarize it?
Yeah,
okay.
Of course. Is the UAP issue being used as justification for expanding AI-driven sensor networks and global surveillance systems under the banner of national security?
Well, I think it intertwines. Okay, basically, all this technology that has got everybody in a tizzy right now, AI and all that, all has come about because of quantum. And at the end of the day, that stuff they've been working on for years and they were utilizing it. But it's gotten to the point now, and here's what people don't understand. The people that developed it and is using it inside the military, when it goes white, they give you what they want, not the best stuff, because they're going to keep that classified, but they're making money off of that. You want to talk about money-making things, these very same people that developed this are making money off the patents and everything else. And hence lies, when you go back and look at Nolan, and he's got a bunch of patents, and other people have all these patents with this stuff, that's where they make their money, because they can, some of this stuff can be, flaked off into the white world and can be utilized. But so all this stuff that's going on that's been made public, the guys behind the scenes are making money off of it.
Right.
Okay. And stuff. And therefore that furthers their brand too. But I really, the thing that bothers me, and I haven't got a total answer for yet, is non-human intelligence. And where does that all fall into this? That is that's the wild card for me. Exactly how much of it is real and how much of it plays into this. And where are we going with that? That is the game changer to me. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's how I look at it, Race.
Non-human intelligences, bro. Like, are we talking about whales or, you know?
I think it goes back to UAPs.
Silverback gorilla?
No, I think it goes back to UAPs. And I think, honestly, when you sum it up, Project Condign is one of the most important documents that's sitting there, right there in front of us, that most people don't want to even look at and consider. And ufology won't look at it simply because they still think we've got a nuts and bolts craft flying from Zeta Reticuli from wherever that's here, you know? And
in other words, you're saying that the people that are devout believers in UFOs don't want to see a project that sort of discerns this is all man-made.
Right, because if you go back what the Green said in Mirage Man, he said what we've been told is not really true, and when the real truth comes out, it'll be a lot different than what we've been told through books and movies and everything going forward. Now, the only other factor left, and then I'll summarize, is religion. Because what does NHI tie in, and how does it tie in from the biblical perspective? Which there are signs inside the Bible that there was some kind of interaction from some other intelligence. You know, whether that just be God himself or something else. So those are the two hot button topics that would cause a huge problem in the country and the world. So ultimately, to sum up ufology, it's a mess. And when you can't get a straight answer from your congressional representatives, because they don't know, when the defense contractors, companies and contractors are not, and intelligence agencies aren't going to tell you what they know, how can you really have a straight up answer on what's really going on and what's taking place? And with AI now, it is completely throwing everything out of whack, because it's getting to the point now where it's hard to tell what's real and what's not anymore. So it's crazier than it's ever been, Race, in my opinion.
Yeah, like, you know, when we were young, pictures and videos were great. They're off the table now completely, and have been for 20 years.
Did you notice one other thing? That we now have the ability from space to create holograms through satellites.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff on that. But let me ask you this, because we've got literally 2 minutes.
Okay.
Let me ask you this. What do you think the solution is on how to move forward in order to maintain a stable and credible platform for the UFO movement to remain in, with so much, with the landscape so thick, with the, let's just call it a technology jungle?
Well, I don't think they want us to. I think they want us to continue to fight with each other, and they want us to continue to debate, argue, and fight, and they don't want a straight up answer, because then I mean, when the 1% can control the rest of the world, that's how they want to keep it, and that's how they do it. But ultimately, I'm doing research right now on another book that I'm going to come out with, and you've heard of this. We did a radio show on Phenomena Radio about Iron Mountain, and they came up with this way back in the 60s on how to control civilization going forward. And you might be shocked how all of that they came up with way back then is coming into play today. And it's been being utilized since that very moment going forward to include the UAP phenomenon itself.
John, we've been at this a while, my man. I sure appreciate you taking your time on this Saturday to come hang out with us and talk to us. Right. Take some questions and stuff. That's awesome.
Well, I hope people don't go down the rabbit hole. And what I mean by that is use common sense. If it don't smell right, it don't taste right, it ain't right.
Oh, we've been in this a long time. You've been in it longer than I have, and I've been in it a lifetime. And I'm telling you now, I've produced thousands of hours of video and audio, and I'm telling you, it's hard to keep your feet planted firmly on the ground and, you know, go to bed and wake up every day with that sense of normality with the way things are politically, the way things are alternatively. The landscape has just become almost unrecognizable. But my opinion, my advice based on our talk here today would probably be, don't hold your breath waiting on the government to tell you shit, because they're not gonna.
I kind of want to end this with one of the movies that did a lot that got to me was the movie Contact. And at the end, Dr. Ellie Arroway was sitting there after she got her funding to continue to see if there was to listen, because, you know, and believe it or not, now they've admitted that pretty much took place. The wow factor, they actually really happened for real. And Sagan did a movie about it. Her comment was, I had an experience that I can't explain, and I'm still to this day trying to figure out what happened and still searching for the answers. If the people that this hurts the most are the experiencers, the ones that have had something happen to them and it's affected them mentally and physically, and those are the ones that it hurts the most. And probably, I don't know if we deserve the answer, but it sure would be nice to have a better idea of what's going on.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. John, thank you so much. I sure appreciate you coming today. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after these messages with more from UFO Audit. And David Marler, our headliner, is standing by ready to go. Don't go anywhere. I got to go full screen, ladies and gentlemen. You got to have this whole thing full screen. I'm getting better at it, I think, as I move on. So, want to welcome everybody back. Thank you, John Burrows, for that awesome chat. You know, I'm really going to look forward to going back and editing later and just going in and chopping some of these segments out and making some video shorts with them to share with everybody on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and everywhere. Because some of this stuff is so compelling. And some of this stuff is really major information that most folks don't know. And it's coming from people that do the work, the boots on the ground folks the people that were there, the horse's mouth. UFO Audit. We've got David Marler on deck. Dave is an internationally recognized UFO researcher, and he's been in it over 35, 36 years as well. Investigative experience in the field, which is important. He's a former Illinois State MUFON director, and he conducted countless of firsthand investigations and appeared on numerous television shows and radio programs. I personally know that myself, discussing the phenomenon. He is an acclaimed author. He wrote the fantastic book, Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation. It's a comprehensive study analyzing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases and helping shape our understanding of these mysterious objects. Today, David serves as the executive director to the National UFO Historical Records Center, and this is in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, where the Bird and I formerly resided many years ago. This is the home of the largest UFO case files in the United States, including the historic archives of many investigative organizations like SUFOS and NICAP and APRO, along with Dr. J. Allen Hynek's original Project Blue Book materials. He also serves as the official archivist and board member of SUFOS. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome David Marler to UFO Audit 2026.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Marler, and I'm very excited to be here presenting today. I was excited when Race Hobbs first reached out to me and stated that he was putting this together. And when he described what the theme would be of these presentations about the state of UFO research, UAP research, where we are as a field, I was very excited by that. I've been involved now actively in the subject for 36 years, which is really hard to believe. And out of that time, I've spent a number of years lecturing across the country as well as Canada on the UFO subject to various audiences. And what I find is a common denominator. People are craving good, credible, well-documented, well-sourced information. And I've tried to provide that to my audiences over the years, as well as in my book, Triangular UFOs, An Estimate of the Situation. My attitude is let the data speak for itself and let people formulate their own conclusions. I really don't have an agenda other than trying to preserve the history. And with that, what I'd like to do is start off my presentation by talking about the exciting work we're doing at the National UFO Historical Records Center. But in addition to that, we will also dive into analyzing the UFO UAP field, talking about the pros, the cons, things that are working well, and things that I truly feel need to change, as I feel that we're at a crossroads as it relates to this subject. Now more than ever, mainstream media, academia are now starting to look at the subject seriously. And I feel it's incumbent upon myself, as well as many of you listening and watching today, to really be good stewards of this information and this history, and really try to provide credible, well-sourced information, devoid of conspiracy theories, devoid of belief. And so with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I'll go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Okay, ready to go. And so again, the title of today's presentation, UFO Audit, my presentation, the current state of the UFO or UAP field, a critical analysis. And again, let's talk about the pros, the cons. Let's reflect on ourselves as well and why we're involved in this subject, because I feel like it's a period to do some introspection as well as looking at the field around us. And so the National UFO Historical Records Center, I'm very proud to say, is the largest UFO historical archive in North America, the largest archive ever assembled on the history of the subject. That's a tall statement, but it's one backed up by the many collections that we curate. We actually are now residing in these portable classrooms on the grounds of the Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, a suburb of Albuquerque. And we have ample security measures, as you can see, security cameras, bulletproof glass, alarm systems, and many other safety protocol to ensure the integrity of the collection. These are just a few pictures to give you an idea of what's on the inside of the buildings. The picture on the right, it shows you the file cabinets, and what you're looking at there, it's only a small portion, but we have the largest collection of historical UFO case files ever assembled. And no surprise, these derive from some of the largest organizations in the country. Here's additional case files. And also, we talk about case files, papers, but keep in mind, we also have ample collections of historic audio recordings. This is just one small collection that we received, reel-to-reel recordings going back to the early 1950s. And over the last several years, we've been digitizing case files, we've been digitizing audio, video, film, and we will eventually be making that available to the general public. The thing I like to mention, though, when I lecture both to adult audiences as well as students, I just gave a series of student lectures recently to one of the local high schools. Whether you relegate UFOs to fact, fiction, or folklore, it is part of our history and it's part of our culture. And like any element of history and culture, I feel that it needs to be preserved, because once these bits of data are lost, they're never reclaimed. And we've lost many collections over the years because aging researchers didn't have a succession plan in place to ensure the integrity of the collection and to ensure the long-term viability of those collections. And so our mission statement with the National UFO Historical Record Center has been, our mission is to collect, preserve, and provide historical UFO materials to the general public and interested parties. With this accumulated data, we hope to assist in serious UFO research endeavors and aid in an accurate chronicling of UFO history for present as well as future generations. The most important statement in our mission statement is the very end, regardless of belief or non-belief in the subject matter. And I state that very clearly because historically speaking, and even today, the subject of UFOs, when it's brought up, or UAPs, and you have to forgive me, I'm a historian, I still use the term UFO, you're typically relegated to one of two categories. On the one hand, there's the UFO believers, and they think that you're a wide-eyed enthusiast that just accepts anything without any critical thinking skills whatsoever. But likewise, on the other end of the spectrum, the far end of the spectrum, you've had scientists and skeptics who refuse to look at the data, but they establish a priori, there's nothing to the subject, therefore I shouldn't look at it. And that's the equivalent of just sticking your head in the sand and ignoring the subject matter. And I've always stated that I find myself somewhere in the middle of this spectrum, as I think most individuals who are interested in the subject are. We're willing to be open-minded, but that doesn't mean we're going to believe everything that comes along. And now more than ever, we need to be very cautious about that, mainly because of some of the shameless profiteering that is going on by individuals within this field. But the major data sets that we have, NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, from 1957 to 1980, collected thousands of UFO reports, the largest civilian UFO effort ever in the history of the United States. We also have CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, Dr. J. Allen Hynek's UFO case files, my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Rodiger at the Center for UFO Studies, I work with very closely, and he's one of our board members. And again, I'm still pinching myself that we finally secured, after 35 years of these things being locked away, the APRO files, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, the first organization to ever collect UFO files. And courtesy of Brian Myers, pictured here with myself, he transitioned the APRO files, 13 file cabinets and 50 boxes were delivered in November of 2023. And we are still making sense out of that incredible collection. The photos, the film, the audio tapes, the interviews, the correspondence is quite amazing. And we've had a number of people over the course of the last year and a half coming out to actually specifically look at those APRO files, because they had been locked away for 35 years. But again, it's the largest gathering of historical materials, but also one of the largest gathering of United States historians on the subject. We have Dr. Mark Rodiger pictured on the left. We have Mr. Barry Roth, my chief archivist and historian. We have Mr. Rod Dyke, pictured center right there at the top with his wonderful hat. And then we also have Rob Swiatek over to the right. And then down below, we have Mr. Barry Greenwood on the left and Mr. Jan Aldridge on the right. And I will mention, I often fail to mention this, Barry Roth moved from Colorado to the Albuquerque area to retire and specifically work in the National UFO Historical Record Center. And most recently, Mr. Jan Aldridge, who for decades had lived in Connecticut, has actually moved to the Albuquerque area as well, specifically to work in this incredible archive that we've been assembling. And we have many more collections coming over the course of the next 1.5 to 2 years. But something that I think needs to be stated, we've had great partnership with the Rio Rancho Public School System, who have provided facilities, provided resources, and allowed us to go into the schools and provide education, not necessarily on the UFO subject alone, but using the UFO subject to teach science, critical thinking skills, and general history of New Mexico. And in addition to that, we've also had local and state governmental assistance. New Mexico State Senator Jay Block recently stated on his Facebook page when he came to pay us a visit on camera, he stated twice that the National UFO Historical Record Center is a national treasure and is looking to financially support our effort. In addition, Sandoval County, the county we reside in, has assisted us with financial support. So it's really unprecedented, the partnership we have with the school system, but also the financial assistance being provided by local and state governmental authorities. Also, this may be a surprise to many, over the course of the last 2 years, we've had ongoing dialogue with agencies within the Department of Defense or Department of War. I need to update my slides. And also the Department of Justice. Agencies within both of those groups are actively looking at the UFO subject, and they voluntarily reached out to myself, representing the National UFO Historical Record Center. And we've actually had visits by agencies that are extremely interested in the history that we have. They're not threatening to take it. They're not threatening to destroy it, as many people, conspiracy theorists, will discuss. But they actually would like to seriously enter into a partnership where we can help educate them on the history of the subject with these incredible data sets that we have. And when you think about all of this, we also have academia now weighing in. We're working with the public school system, but in addition to that, we have a number of PhD researchers from various universities now starting to look at the UFO subject, UAP subject seriously. And as evidence of that, I've been working with the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, or CBC, on a major documentary film on the UFO UAP subject. And what's intriguing about that is it will be airing this fall in Canada, but subsequent to that, it will be airing in 50 countries. And I'm happy to state that they focused on my triangular UFO research as part of the documentary, but more specifically, one of the areas of focus in the documentary film will be the National UFO Historical Record Center and the work that we're doing with academia. So I'm very excited about that. And the focus of the show is not on UFO researchers, it's on PhD researchers now looking at the UFO UAP subject seriously through various lenses, right? Whether it's sociology, physics, and many other disciplines. And so they're applying scientific methodologies to truly starting to look and investigate and research this subject. So I'm happy to be part of this documentary, and I hope you're able to see it when it eventually airs in your country. But again, we could only do this through the cooperation of our partners, the Rio Rancho Public School System. They were truly visionaries, and they wanted to help us preserve this history, but use it as a creative vehicle to educate students on basic core curriculum. And you have to ask yourself, though, why are we garnering this kind of serious attention? Politicians, academia, school systems actually providing resources. And I think it really falls down to one word that I think we need to focus on as it relates to the subject and the field as a whole: credibility. We don't spout conspiracy theories. We don't discuss things unless we have ample documentation, original source materials to back up what we're saying. And for those of you that I've met over the many years and decades that I've been lecturing on the subject, if you've attended my lectures, I always cite my sources. You may question my conclusions, but you can never question my data, because I always provide the citations on where I derive that information. But I was existing in this field for a long time before 2017 came around, and I think you can agree that it was a new era with the publication of the New York Times article in December 2017, where we learned that there was actually a top secret Pentagon UFO program called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and where we had a new term entered into our lexicon, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, or now unidentified anomalous phenomenon. And it truly has been a shift as far as our paradigm. Prior to this, we were existing in that post-Project Blue Book era where the government, NASA, all the scientists were saying, there's nothing to see here, move along. This truly changed things. You can really point to one date, and it's December 16th, 2017, where things really changed in that respect. But the state of ufology post-2017, there's been a lot of positive, great strides that have taken place, but we have new so-called experts coming out of the woodwork. And by that, I mean general public figures all over social media voicing their opinions and views on the subject. Journalists, and very specifically pseudo-journalists, people claiming to be journalists who aren't, acting as authorities on the subject. Most of them offer speculation in place of investigation. And in addition to that, opinions often trump facts in this day and age. There are shows that are just focused and based on people's opinions, attitudes, perceptions, rather than data. And I think we need to change that. And most of these people were not even heard of prior to 2017. Very young people getting involved in the field, which is great. We need the next generation to become engaged and aware and discuss the subject. But many of these individuals are well-meaning, but they're ill-informed as it relates to the history. And oftentimes I hear misquotes, I hear misinformation as it relates to some of these historic cases. And more PhDs in university institutions are entering into the field, which is great. But again, it's fantastic they have their PhDs and their university resources, but quite often they lack the institutional knowledge of the UFO subject and its rich history. And so they're trying to enter into the field with the best of intentions, but they really don't have a working knowledge of the UFO subject or its history. But the field is at a critical juncture, as I alluded to earlier. Some of the pros, of course, public awareness is at an all-time high. Media outlets are consistently covering the subjects. Academia, as I mentioned, weighing in more now than ever before publicly. Governmental agencies are acknowledging this needs to be studied as opposed to ignoring it and saying there's nothing to see. And there's a progressive erosion of skepticism that I think you'll agree over the years. We're seeing less and less skepticism and more openness towards a scientific, serious inquiry into this subject matter. But equally so, we have the cons, the flip side of the coin. The internet has added to the quantity of dialogue and information, but not the quality. Anyone with a webcam and microphone in this day and age, as you know, can pretend to be an expert on the subject and flood the field with misinformation that has the potential to reach millions of people. And the ufotainment industry, as I like to call it, is thriving with an ever-increasing array of television shows that truly don't care about being factually accurate. They're there for the ratings and the advertising dollars. I'm sorry, that's a harsh reality that we just have to deal with. Some of the shows are pretty good caliber, but the vast majority of these shows overtly sensationalize the subject and are factually in error as it relates to facts involved in some of these cases. In addition, with cons, most people assume if they see a researcher on TV, they must be credible. Many are not. I've encountered some of these people over the years, and I know they don't have a sound methodology. I know that they're not meticulous in their research, and some quite often, again, substitute opinion for research. And many of the popular journalists and pseudo-journalists in this space are shameless sensationalists. There's no other way to put it. Obsessed with whistleblower testimony. And not to say that we should ignore whistleblower testimony, but I think we need to be very skeptical. It is just that, testimony, a story. We need verifiable, corroborating information to back up some of these narratives. We just cannot accept these at face value. And certain figures within this field are constantly selling you access to supposed alien artifacts or bodies. And I like to call it pay to play. They're out there strictly for the monetary aspects of this subject. And unfortunately, I think many of these individuals, and some names may come to mind if you're familiar with the subject, are consistently out there trying to generate money as a result, revenue as a result of people's interest. And the old phrase, there's a sucker born every minute. And unfortunately, new people coming into this subject don't don't know how or cannot discern what is credible versus not credible, or they don't realize that particular individual has a 20-year history of bilking the UFO people of their money and coming up with a lot of spurious material. But the state of affairs in the current trend, quantity is not quality. Despite the quantity of dialogue, the quantity of TV shows, the quantity of discussion on social media, that doesn't necessarily reflect the quality. And that's something I think we need to focus on. And when we look at the UFO UAP subject, like I said, this is a critical analysis. And when we point the finger at the field, as if we point the finger at any one individual, we always have three fingers pointing back. And so I'd like to think that if we're going to affect change and really police this field much better, it starts with each one of us. And so I want to run some things by you and see what your thoughts are on this. And I really want you to do some soul searching. I don't want you to just listen to this and let it go in one ear and out the other. Truly internalize what I'm going to run by you in the next few slides here. And it's a good time for some introspection, to pause and reflect within ourselves. Who are we? Why are we here? How are we operating? And what can I contribute to the field in a positive way? So I want you to ask yourself these questions. And I've asked myself these questions many times. Am I here to learn about the objective truth regarding UFOs? Think about that, the objective truth regarding UFOs. Am I here to bolster my preconceived beliefs regarding UFOs? In other words, is confirmation bias entering into what I listen to, what I see, what I read? Am I only gravitating towards material that bolsters my preconceived beliefs on the subject? Or am I willing to be an objective individual in weighing all of the information equally? Do I care about what is and what is not credible? And more specifically, am I here just to be entertained? Is this entertainment, or are you truly looking for answers to the subject? Is this a field of inquiry where you actually would like to try to garner or develop clarity as it relates to the UFO subject? What are my criteria or guiding principles for determining valid material versus spurious information? This is an important one. And I think many of us struggle with this because we've never asked ourselves that question. What are my criteria or guiding principles for determining valid material or spurious versus spurious information? And if you struggle to answer that last question, I think it's cause for concern. It's suggested that there is no vetting process or standard for you assessing information when you are in the UFO UAP realm. And we can't just accept things arbitrarily because there are liars, there are con artists, there are people spreading, whether intentionally or unintentionally, misinformation. Many people are just simply repeating factually erroneous material. Again, well-intentioned, but we need to be very careful about this. How do we weigh the information that we read and that we ingest? My criteria and standards have always been this, and I talk to the students about this. I try to cite original source documents whenever possible, going back to the original investigative forms, the original interview notes, the original recordings of interviews with witnesses, the original government documents. I don't rely on second, third-hand information. I also try to find corroborative testimony or source materials whenever possible. In the case files we have at the National UFO Historical Records Center, we have many civilian UFO reports and military UFO reports, but those case files are also bolstered by contemporaneous newspaper accounts that talk about the sighting. So we're not reliant just on the UFO report form or the military report form. We have contemporaneous media accounts that we can also cite, and bringing those elements together sometimes provides great clarity in many of these cases. I only accept government documents with an established provenance, no pseudo-government documents provided by pseudo-forensic document experts. There's some individuals in this field over the years that call themselves forensic document experts, and they are not. They have no formal training whatsoever, but they automatically ascribe that title to them, which then erroneously conveys a sense of authority on what they're telling you. But, whether it's MJ12 or other documents out there, if we cannot verify the authenticity of these documents, we can read them, we can put them in our gray file and our questionable file, but we cannot use those as a basis for research and understanding. We need to be very careful about that. Equally so, we can only accept photos and videos from verified sources. And in this day and age, with our smartphones, we have to have the metadata to go with that, which will assist us in understanding what was recorded. Today, as you know, with YouTube, you can look at UFO photos and videos all day long, forever. You can binge watch UFO photos and videos. There are groups that are actively creating UFO videos and UFO photos for clickbait, again, to generate revenue. This is the reality that we exist in now with AI, where AI can create government documents, can create videos and photographs. We need to be very wary about this. And so-called whistleblower testimony, again, it can be heard, but it can't be believed outright without some type of corroborative testimony or official documentation. It is just that, a story, a narrative. And conspiracy theories should not be taken seriously at face value. And as we know, the internet is full of conspiracy theories, whether it's UFO related or otherwise, unless we can back up those conspiracy theories with source materials, credible source materials that we can investigate more thoroughly. Also, I think it's very important that when we're on social media, when we're on the internet, when we're watching some of these documentary films and TV shows, and even news channels, don't confuse popularity of individuals with credibility regarding these sources of information. Many people are popular, but I would argue some of the most popular voices are the least credible. Always recognize the difference between speculation versus investigation. And I like to focus on investigation. I can speculate with my friends, but I don't waste time when I'm standing at a podium at a UFO conference to speculate, because it is just that, speculation, idle speculation. We need to start having a more data-driven approach and truly investigating the subject. And always fully acknowledge what you don't know and admit that. I've had people over the many years at UFO conferences, you ask them a question and they'll contort themselves because they feel like they have to have an answer. In this field, there's a lot of questions we cannot answer. We don't have all of the data. We don't have all of the insights. And I think we need to acknowledge what we know and be honest and open to say, we don't know what this is all about. We don't know what this event involved. And skepticism is not a bad word. I know sometimes it garners a lot of negativity when people talk about skeptics or skepticism. I don't mind skepticism. There's a reason they call it healthy skepticism. And again, I've often said over the years, if you're in the UFO UAP field, you have to have a good BS detector because there is a lot of BS out there. And the burden of proof is on the person making the extraordinary claim, not the person who questions it. This is something that I see in chat groups. This is something I see on comments regarding YouTube videos. Someone is on a video and they're describing this conspiracy theory, or they're describing all this supposed insider intel that they have regarding the government and UFOs. And then I'll see critical comments waged against these claims. And people will attack the people waging the critical questions. And we have to keep in mind, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It is well within our right to ask those critical questions when someone is making an outlandish or really wild, lurid conspiracy tale or claim. And so the burden of proof, again, is on the person making the extraordinary claim, not the person questioning it. I think sometimes the UFO UAP community sometimes flips that idea. And again, Carl Sagan has that famous quote, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I share this with the students all the time because it is true. Again, my criteria and standards, though, don't get excited by UFO photos and videos online due to the explosion of AI on the scene, as we've talked about. There's so much fake imagery out there. I've actually developed a term. I call it UFO pornography. You'll see photos, you'll see videos, and it gets that excitement. It gets the adrenaline rush when you first watch it. But at the end of the day, you're no wiser as it relates to the UFO phenomenon. But it's there just to get a rise out of you and to get that clickbait. And the reality is truly seeing is not believing in this day and age with AI technology. And I'm sure all of you have seen a lot of crazy stuff on the internet, on Facebook and elsewhere, where, you know, you have individuals or celebrities saying or doing something and it's completely AI generated. So how do we expect UFO photos and videos to be quote unquote evidence to support the existence of UFOs or UAPs when we have so much minutia that we have to sort through in this day and age? And again, viewing them online is one thing. I know it's kind of casual entertainment, and it's nice to look at the videos every now and then you can't help but click on a link that someone references. But what I would put forth to you is watching them is one thing, but when you forward them or you share them to other groups, then you're just providing more exposure to dubious material. And the claim I hear often waged against the government is the government's spreading disinformation. Well, I have to ask, if you're forwarding these spurious UFO videos and photographs to additional people and larger audiences, who's spreading the disinformation now? So again, I think there's a personal responsibility that comes with trying to police force our field and ensure that we're only providing credible material and not creating a platform for all this misinformation and disinformation. And my take is, with regard to the government, quite often people talk about the government like it's one monolithic entity, which is rather humorous for anybody that's worked in the military or within intelligence circles. But my attitude has been, if your focus is on studying the government cover-up of UFOs versus UFOs or UAPs themselves, it's like studying entomologists in the field who are studying insects when you really want to know about the insects themselves. If you want to know about the insects, then study the insects, focus on that. Or in our case, study the UFO UAP reports. And I say that only because if you're going to waste time worrying about what the government may or may not know or may not have in their possession, you may never know unless they tell you. And even then, I think you have to acknowledge, if they tell you, can you believe them? And that brings me to my next thought, disclosure. This word has been overused so much in the field in recent years. And the reason I say that is I find that there's cognitive dissonance occurring with a large swath of the UFO community as it relates to disclosure. These individuals, many of these individuals, believe for decades that, again, the government cannot be trusted and that the government is hiding information and materials relating to UFOs or UAPs. Yet today, most people spend the majority of their time hoping and waiting for quote unquote disclosure from those same governmental agencies. And I just think, given your historical level of distrust, can you believe anything they might present to you now or in the future? Think about that. And again, with regard to disclosure, with all due respect to elements of the UFO UAP community discussing, lobbying, and awaiting disclosure, it will happen when the authorities decide it will. You can be on social media and you can post and you can share emails. You can talk to your blue in the face. But my personal feeling is you're not going to force the government to do anything, let alone disclosure. Let's also ask ourselves, what do we mean by disclosure? That's often thrown around, but people don't operationally define what that is. From my opinion, in talking to most people that are strong advocates for disclosure, it's really code word for show us the crash discs and dead aliens. And I think beyond that, there has been a lot of information released with the ODNI acknowledging that there have been cases of UFOs, UAPs that they cannot explain. And in that sense, compared to the post-Project Blue Book era, we're now, again, because of December 2017, we have had disclosure with a lowercase d. They're no longer saying there's nothing here. They're acknowledging there is a phenomenon, whatever that phenomenon is. And again, for people coming in 2017 or after, I think you fail to realize that for decades, we had to deal with government denials where they wouldn't even address the subject, or NASA wouldn't even touch the subject with a 10-foot pole. But there has been disclosure with a lowercase d. But for the advocates for disclosure with the uppercase d, I think it's basically show us the crash discs and dead aliens. And my take is focus on what we already have. For decades, we in the civilian sector have compiled thousands upon thousands of UFO case files and reports that can be viewed in person and will eventually be online through our current digitization effort at the National UFO Historical Records Center. If you're truly interested in learning more about the subject, we welcome you to review these case files and materials, understanding that it requires effort. And I know this may be a shock to a lot of people, but real research is work. It's rolling up your sleeves, it's going through the files, it's making notes. It's just not surfing the internet. Again, I would argue 75% of the information on UFOs or UAPs on the internet is a waste of time, is erroneous, is falsified, made up, again, for clickbait, for profiteering. And again, I think we need to take a data-driven approach. And as I've told the students locally just this week, when we were talking about the case files that we have, the UFO case files that we've gathered over the decades aren't there just as historical artifacts. These are all potential data points. We estimate we have around 100,000 case files, civilian, military, foreign, and domestic, going back 75 plus years. And if we're going to look at all of that data, and if we digitize all that data, and we can use AI algorithms to look at that information, we can start looking for patterns, trends, correlations in the data, if any. And that is real research. And that, I think, is going to give us insights into what's going on with the UFO phenomenon or UAP phenomenon. I'm not here to say we're going to get the answers to the subject, but I think we can gain insights which could be stepping stones towards eventual understanding of this subject. And if our beliefs are not predicated on the data, and I want you to think about this, then what is it all about? What's it all based on? Faith? And if the answer is yes, then this is not a field of inquiry, it's religion. It has to be predicated on the data, on the information. Because again, otherwise we're just creating a new religion out of the UFO UAP subject. Think about that. Well, and then one other thing I think we need to acknowledge is there is mythology with regard to this subject. There's a lot of spurious narratives and stories that have been borne out after decades of telling and retelling. And then there's also history. And what I mean by that is we need to clearly distinguish what is history and what is mythology and know the difference. We can't conflate the two. Otherwise, we're in this murky area of ambiguity where facts and fiction all blend together. An example would be, one example of the history, the Socorro, New Mexico UFO incident of April 24th, 1964. Lonnie Zamora, Socorro police officer, sees an egg-shaped object landing. It burns the ground. He sees two beings near the object. The beings disappear purportedly back into the object, and the object takes off and disappears. This is a well-documented case, one of the more popular cases historically from the 60s era. We have the official Air Force files. We have all the contemporaneous newspaper accounts. We have audio recordings of Lonnie Zamora being interviewed at the time. We have all of the investigators' notes that were on the scene right after the incident. This is documented history. And I say that only to compare it to an example of mythology. President Eisenhower met with the aliens. He had an emergency dental appointment, but really it was a cover story for him meeting with the aliens. Absolutely zero factual evidence for this story. It's a great story, and people love telling it and retelling it. There is no documented evidence this ever happened. This is an example of mythology, stories that are told and retold with zero factual basis. And so I think we need to compare and contrast those. And again, narratives that are well documented versus those with no documentation. We have to acknowledge that. We have to call out mythology from the history. And my take on what is our role, how can you and I together make this a better field of study with regard to the UFO UAP field? We can't control or change the nature of what we're studying, right? If we're dealing with an external reality, UAPs, UFOs, we can't control that. It's external to us. And we can't predict where and when they're going to appear. It's outside our control. But I would argue what we can control and change is ourselves and our attitude and approach in selectively weighing information and evidence in a healthy, objective, and appropriate manner. In addition, if you're going to bake a cake, it's only as good as the ingredients you put into it. And equally so, I think that's how we need to look at the UFO UAP field, especially as it holds true for our research and any derived conclusions that we have. Again, I mentioned our partners. I can't emphasize enough the incredible partnership we have with the Rio Rancho Public School System. As a result of them providing facilities, we provide educational lectures to the students, teachers, and administrators. One of the areas that we focus on is critical thinking in the UFO subject. And I'm not going to go into the whole presentation now, but just touching on a few things that we try to instill in the students, which I think is important to bring up in the context of this discussion. Belief versus fact. Belief is based on faith. Fact is based on knowledge. And are we going to base our understanding and our belief systems on opinion? Or are we going to base it on things that can be proved true or false? And so belief versus fact, I think, is an important cornerstone in how we approach this subject and how we conduct ourselves. And I always like to tell the students, if I believe I can fly, I can go on the roof of my house and I can jump off. But the fact is that I can't, and I'm probably going to wind up in the ER because physics, and more specifically gravity, is going to teach me a humbling lesson. So belief can lead you to the rooftop, but it's not going to make you fly. And so I think we really need to be careful of how belief can lead us astray. And I will cite a terrible example of this. It's probably the worst example that we've dealt with in recent years with the UFO subject, and that was the Heaven's Gate cult. That was a great example how these people's belief led them to commit mass suicide. And unfortunately, I had the opportunity to meet some of the Heaven's Gate members who attended a conference a year and a half before they committed suicide. And they were trying to recruit new members into their cult. I don't think that they were successful at all, but I always think back to those individuals that I saw there at that conference and how a year and a half later they were deceased, all because of belief that led them to commit suicide. So I think it's a cautionary tale when we look at the history of this subject. And again, the fact is gravity is real. We talked to the students also about situations where facts are very important, and two that are obvious that come to mind, the court of law and the court of science. And both of these areas require credentials and serious ramifications if you behave badly. If you're an attorney and you're caught doing something disreputable, you could be disbarred. And in the scientific field, you could be fired and ostracized by your scientific colleagues. And I say that to you because what are we going to do with the people that are making money off this subject by fabricating, by hoaxing? How do we hold them accountable? It's very difficult. We're not in a court of law. We're not within the legal profession. We're not operating within the field of medicine or science where credentials can be taken away. So how do we police force our field? And questions that come to mind: how do we police our own field? How do we hold bad actors accountable for shameless profiteering from the subject? How do we censor these bad actors so they don't continue to inflict damage on the field with repeated hoaxes and false information? And there are certain individuals who I will not mention by name for those that have been around for a while. I think certain names immediately come to mind. I don't have the answers to these questions, though. I'm throwing these out to you. We need to reflect seriously on this. Do we call these individuals out publicly? Do we publicly shame them? How do we try to ensure the integrity of the work that's being done in this field when we really don't have any formal structure to disbar these individuals or to make them accountable? And then something else I talked to the students about are thresholds of proof. And I think this is important as we think about what we look at with the UFO UAP subject. And quite often you hear, which is the lowest level of proof, the court of public opinion, you be the judge. And I say that because recently, December of last year, there was an article, nearly half of Americans now believe aliens have visited Earth, new polling reveals. And people will often cite this and talk about it. Well, great. That's fantastic. Nearly half of Americans believe aliens have visited Earth. But for some historical context, I think it's important to state 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, everyone thought on the face of this planet that the Earth was flat and that if you go far enough, you're just going to fall off the edge. The reality is, and I'm sorry for any flat earthers that are watching this, we do live on a globe. We live on a sphere. We live on a planet that is an oblate spheroid. And so the court of public opinion really doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things. But then there's the mid-level, which is a court of law. And the burden of proof falls into different categories. You have the preponderance of evidence, clear and convincing evidence, and then the highest standard would be beyond a reasonable doubt. And quite often this is involving murder cases or homicide cases where you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual did it. But I think you'll agree a lot of information, credible information within the UFO UAP field falls into these various categories, depending on what we're talking about. And then, of course, the highest threshold of proof is the court of science, where the scientific method is employed, where you make an observation, you ask questions, formulate a hypothesis, conduct an experiment, draw conclusions, and record your results. Something I like to share with the students, though, that I think this is a standard by which we should operate as we look at this subject, keeping in mind one thing. One possible exception to this is, what if we are studying something that we cannot control? What if the subject that we are studying is more advanced than we are? And some might argue that the UFO UAP subject is just that, something that we can't put under a microscope, something that we can't segregate from the rest of reality, something that we can't control the variables insofar as how it interacts with the variables or the variables interact with it. So something to think about, that there may be limitations as it relates to the scientific method, as it relates to UFOs, UAPs. And so I like to talk to the students about just the thresholds of proof, with obviously the court of science being the highest threshold and way to weigh information and to study and to judge things. But how does this apply to UFOs? Well, a lot of it, you'll have to admit, hinges on eyewitness testimony. And that in turn rests on the credibility of the witness. And credibility, as I tell the students, is a capacity to be believed, quality that renders testimony from a witness worthy of belief, believability. And in psychology, the one thing I always remember from college, my college days, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so looking at an individual's past, do they have a history of lying, or do they have a history of telling the truth, is usually a pretty good marker of where they are at today in their narrative and in their testimony. But items to consider: do they have a history of lying, telling wild tales? Do they change their story with each retelling? Are their statements complimentary or contradictory? Do friends, family, fellow students attest to them being credible? Is there any reason for them to lie that would personally benefit them? Money, fame, social media clicks, being a hoaxer or a practical joker? And again, even though I talked to the students about this, I think it's germane to what we're discussing today regarding characters within the UFO field. How would you judge individuals making some of the wild claims? Do they have a history of telling wild tales? Do they change their stories over time? Are they looking at making money out of this, or fame or fortune? And something that I also tell the students is, we got to remember that even though a witness is credible, they can still be wrong. They can make an erroneous observation or interpretation of what they're viewing. So sincere, yes; accurate, no, in some cases. And I also talk to the students about 3 hurdles to understanding what someone truly experiences regarding a UFO or UAP event. And I talk about 3 hurdles, which I mentioned in my book: perception, interpretation, recollection. Perception: are we perceiving things accurately, visually? Was I wearing my glasses when I saw the UFO or the UAP? The auditory: am I hearing things accurately, or do I have a hearing deficiency that impacted my ability to hear a sound that may have been emanating from the UFO, UAP? Olfactory senses: do I have the ability to smell? Was there any type of odor associated with the UFO or UAP? And tactile: did I feel something? Was there an electrostatic charge? And was I sensing that correctly, or was it just goosebumps due to my psychological reaction to what I was observing? And was I alone, or did others perceive what I did? And if so, what did they perceive? And was it in line with what I reported? And so these are things that we break down for the students. But equally so, let's say I perceived something accurately. I saw it to the best of my ability, but then how do I interpret what I'm observing? If I perceive something accurately, am I interpreting it accurately? My eyesight might not fail me, but my mind can. And these are just examples I show the students. The number in the upper right, is that 66 or 99? It depends on your perspective. The lower left, you've seen that picture probably before. Do you see a candlestick, or do you see 2 faces? And in the center lower portion and in the lower right portion, you have yellow lines and black lines. Those lines are the same width, but the perception is skewed based on the context of those lines. Some look larger than others, but in fact, they're the same length. So these are perceptual cues and variations that we have to deal with. And then ultimately, as we know, memory, recollection. That's another factor when we're especially looking at cases in retrospect. Even if I perceive something and interpret it accurately, am I recalling the details to the UFO investigator or researcher? And again, as we know, memory is malleable over minutes, hours, days, years, and decades. And so we need to be cognizant of that when we're taking witness testimony. And again, I also try to educate the students on objective versus subjective information, measurable versus not measurable, because I think that's important. I've often stated I would never be involved in UFOs if it was just people saying they saw things. People see the face of Jesus in a Cheeto, or they see the Virgin Mary in a Cheeto. I don't care just about visual observations, but as we know, for those that have been steeped in the UFO UAP field, we have multiple sensors that have detected these UFO UAPs, radar, along with other electro-optical sensors and satellite imagery. And so the fact of that really raises the bar of credibility with regard to the subject and our study of it. And the final thoughts, teaching critical thinking skills to students is great. I love it. And the kids are really open. And sometimes the school kids ask better questions than some of my adult audiences. And perhaps some adults in this field should begin learning and adopting them as well, critical thinking skills. And they are sorely lacking in this field, in my humble opinion, after 36 years of being deeply immersed in this field. A final warning I'd like to mention: scientific discoveries are rarely achieved by one singular event or person. It is usually through the culmination of methodical research activities by many people over time that lead to discoveries. It's very rare you have the eureka moment. So keep that in mind when someone says they have a bombshell UFO UAP video or a bombshell whistleblower testimony. Those in and of themselves are not going to lead us to new insights. And think about all the bombshell UFO videos that have been released by some of the prominent figures in this field in recent years. Has it truly given you any new insights or insights into the phenomenon that you didn't have before? In addition, beware of some of the prominent players, the hucksters and con artists. I can't be polite about this. They're out there in this field who repeatedly try to sell you false wisdom. They know how disclosure is going to happen. They have insider knowledge, and they're telling you and telling you all about disclosure, even though these people have never worked within the military or within the intelligence community, but they're going to dispense their wisdom on what they know about disclosure. Fake UFO documents, again, with AI, unless you have an established provenance, be very wary of those documents and those forensic document experts in the field. Whistleblower testimony, again, I'm not calling whistleblowers liars. So let me be very clear on that point. What I'm saying is we can take their testimony, but then it is incumbent upon us to try to trust but verify the information. And so we cannot just accept this at face value. Video evidence is not that. It is not evidence. It's interesting to have. It's supplemental material in some UFO cases, but again, we're not going to solve the UFO mystery by looking at video evidence. And another one is predictions. One individual in this field every month is saying in the next 72 hours, there's going to be a bombshell revelation. And guess what? It never happens. But yet every month they're saying it again, just to keep those people clicking on their sites, to try to remain relevant in this field. And again, bombshell announcements on a regular basis. We have certain individuals in this field that are always making bombshell revelations, and certain news people that are coming up with these sensational claims. For those that have been in this field for decades, there aren't sensational things happening all the time. So most of these are being fabricated. The drama, the importance of these things are being fabricated, again, because once you start making money on this subject as a living, you have to keep coming up with new information to remain relevant, to get that money continually pouring in. And again, I don't mean to be too harsh on the subject, but that is the harsh reality we're dealing with. And my final message to you is this: let's try to focus on a few things. Rationalism versus sensationalism, objectivity versus gullibility, intellect versus emotion, and thinking versus feeling, and knowing versus believing. Let's think about those as we wrap this session up. Rationalism, objectivity, intellect, thinking, knowing. These are not bad things. These are laudable goals. And if we all ascribe to trying to cling to those things on the left versus the things on the right, I think we're going to be a better researcher, a better individual looking at the subject. And I think it really speaks to us having a better field of inquiry as it relates to UFOs and UAPs. And in summary, I'd like to say that, touching really on a lot of the themes that we just covered today, we're going to have a new series coming out on social media. We're beginning the digital scanning of all of our case files from beginning to end chronologically. This will be a long process, and people are chomping at the bit wanting to know the information that we have at the archive. So as a stopgap measure, while we're doing the digitization work, we're going to be doing periodic episodes on social media to share the case files, share the material that we have in the archive. And so we're going to be having a show called UFOs in Retrospect, which is an appropriate name because we're looking back on the history, on these historic cases. And everything that we talked about today, as far as the way we should conduct ourselves, is exemplified in the commercial that I'm going to share with you, which we just posted a week or two ago. And so I want to thank you for allowing me to kind of expound on my personal feelings, my attitude towards the subject. I've never had this opportunity. And again, my thanks to Race Hobbs, because whereas I've lectured on cases and the history of the subject, I've never had an opportunity to just really have a deep personal conversation with you. And I want to thank you for those that tuned in for the duration of this presentation. I know sometimes it's hard to hear these things as we look at a field that I think we all care about, but if we truly care about it, we do have to be critical, and we have to look at ways that we can better ourselves, ways that we can better our field. And so with that, I want to thank you. I wish you all well, and I will now lead into the commercial and let you see what UFOs in retrospect is all about. Thank you all.
How do we make the intangible tangible? How do we come to an understanding of a phenomenon when so much information is concocted or misreported and circulated on the internet? How do we find clarity, not only in understanding individual UFO cases, but also the big picture? My name is David Marler. I've been an investigator, researcher, author, and lecturer on the UFO subject for over 35 years. I've always anchored my research in what was meticulously reported and documented regarding UFO incidents. I never succumbed to conspiracy theories. I never relied on second or third-hand reporting. I never let belief lead me. Rather, I've taken a data-driven approach towards the subject, predicated on the original, contemporaneous sources of information. Now, in conjunction with the National UFO Historical Record Center, the largest UFO archive ever assembled in the United States, I am working with a dedicated team who shares this approach and vision. Now, more than ever, we need credible material presented on the UFO subject. As we work through our vast archive, we will bring you the original source materials related to historic UFO cases. Our archive is comprised of thousands of case files derived from some of the earliest UFO investigative and research organizations, APRO, NICAP, CUFOS, and many others. Some of these are familiar cases, but the majority have never been shared or discussed publicly before, until now. Together with my colleagues, who are some of the leading historians in the United States on the UFO subject, we look to be a credible voice for the field. Everything we present is backed up by the original military or civilian UFO reports, the original audio tapes, the original correspondence, the original news clippings, and original photos. All of these are housed at the National UFO Historical Record Center, where they can be accessed by visitors. All of these materials we look to share with you, our audience, in our series, UFOs in Retrospect.
Dave Marler's legacy is going to last generations because of the work. Look, when you look at all of those files and all of those papers and discs and tapes and reel-to-reels and just a monsoon of data that has to be collated and organized and digitized, and just how he manages all of that, there's nobody else that could do it. And then on top of that, you find the young man out here presenting what he's trying to do, his vision, his passion, his dream, while working a full-time job, I might add, and managing to hit pay dirt and working with our youth, in fact, with public school systems, with the townships and the local government, and God knows who else he has to get funding, to make this all work. And the wonderful volunteers at the museum, at the historical center, second to none. I've gotten to know some of them just a little bit virtually. But they all seem to be just really dedicated people. And, his work preserving and advancing UFO history earned him a UFO Congress Lifetime Achievement Award. For a lot of people, that's a huge feather in their cap. 2022, he got that award. His efforts to shape and future serious UFO research in the future are paramount to him. speaking to young kids and helping shape young minds about the best way to move forward, looking at this subject from a very mature standpoint. I feel like I'm around I'm around a professor when I was in college, when I'm around Dave. Dave, thank you so much for headlining our event today and the wonderful insights that you presented to all of us. My brother, thank you. I try not to ask a whole lot of you guys, but you're always there for me, and I appreciate it. I want to thank also Tamara, Greg, how you doing? Carl and Lisa and Teresa and Mike and just everybody. I don't want to miss it. Jesse's in there. There's just been a whole bunch of people in here chatting away and kind of hanging out and commenting and things. Kathleen, thank you so much. I just I can't say enough about the Unexplained Network and everything we're doing. We've got a big conference coming up in October. It's the Oz KC Cryptid Fest, September the 12th, and it's $39 a person, and it's an in-person event up there. You get all the information over at unexplainednetwork.com, as well as all kinds of other information on the Conference Connection that I do every quarter of the year for everybody who likes to go to conferences and symposiums and expos and festivals. I try to make sure that we get all the main ones in there on the audio version for the radio. And then you can always go to the website and click on the Conference Connection tab, and it'll take you right where you need to go to get all the information you need. Again, thank you, everybody. Micah, John Burrows, thank you, David Marler, and most importantly, thank you, Margie K. I appreciate you and all you do for all of us out here. Everybody, it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride today, and I want you to go enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for supporting the network, and we'll see you next time.
Something waiting, something away. They show